Above the gray fog, Klein leaned back into his high-backed chair and held creeping hunger. He remained silent for several seconds. Finally, he released the psychiatrist's soul according to the specific steps. A tall figure quickly appeared by the side of the bronze table. It was a woman whose face looked somewhat blurry. Her pain and distorted feelings was apparent. Klein looked at her and asked her as though he was chatting with her, "Do you still remember who you are?" In the mysterious space, he could directly channel her spirit. The psychiatrist's enmity reduced substantially as she smiled bitterly. "Of course I remember. I was a member of a secret organization and was planning to meet a friend in Tosgarter Island, but I ended up encountering pirates on the way. Although I used my powers to resolve the disaster, the pirates who escaped informed Kalangos of the corresponding situation. In order to obtain my powers, he deliberately changed course and intercepted our ship. You can probably imagine what happened after that. Thanks to his meticulousness, I was killed instantly, unlike the other female passengers who encountered things that were worse than death." Klein fell silent for a few seconds before nodding slightly. "Do you know of the ancient book known as Grozel's Travels?" He believed that since Grozel's travels came from the dragons, it was possible that the psychiatrist had heard of its name or the corresponding information. The female psychiatrist thought over it carefully before shaking her head. "I'm sorry. I've never heard that name before." Klein no longer bothered with the topic and switched to asking, "Since you're about to dissipate and gain eternal peace, do you have any last wishes?" The psychiatrist lowered her head and chuckled. "I wish to be revived." "All right. I know that this wish cannot be satisfied. Everything else isn't necessary. I've been dead for years. My family and friends have probably already received news of my death. Informing them again of my death will only dig up the pain of those memories. Let's leave it at that. Thank you. That should be it." Her figure quickly dissipated and vanished, leaving behind a huge golden iris that could expose the thoughts of everyone's hearts. This was the beyonder characteristic of a psychiatrist. Klein sighed and began pondering over the details of what the psychiatrist had said. She was visiting a friend at Tosgarter Island alone without any family. Tosgarter Island is located at the easternmost front of the Sonia Sea, and it's south of the Gargas archipelago. That's the easternmost colony of the Lone Kingdom, while the Gargas archipelago belongs to the Fasak Empire. What kind of friend would be there? What kind of friend is worth visiting after taking such a long trip? Although she only said that she's from a secret organization, the chances are that it's the psychology alchemists. Was she out on a mission? Klein respected the deceased and didn't wish to dig out her secrets, so he didn't probe deeper. Without any clues, he quickly stopped thinking about such matters and considered something else. After hunting down Wormtongue Mythor King, regardless of the reason, I have to leave Byam for the time being. I've really done quite a bit in the City of Generosity during this period of time. Yes, I'll participate in about 3 Beyonder gatherings and confirm whether there are the main ingredients of Nimblewright Master before leaving. Klein rapidly made a decision and conjured a scene of the world praying. Covering it with the grey fog, he threw the scene to the crimson star representing Miss Justice. Audrey was standing on the balcony on the 3rd floor looking at the nearby village. The rooftops were mainly brick red in color as they showed depictions, abstract pictures, or real pictures of dragons. Suddenly, the familiar endless void surfaced in front of her eyes. Amidst the grey fog, a blurry figure was standing high above, praying to the god above. "Honorable Mr. Fool, please inform Miss Justice that she can make preparations for the transaction." "I can make preparations for the transaction?" He has obtained the beyonder characteristic of a psychiatrist? But he still didn't have one yesterday. The world's efficiency shocked Audrey as she nearly forgot to thank Mr. Fool. Thankfully, she was no longer the green and naive lady from before. She had been exposed to several major matters and rapidly calmed her mind as she sincerely thanked him. She passed on the message for Mr. World to wait another 2 to 3 days as she was preparing to pay off the money she owed to Mr. Fool's Blessed. Although she had sufficient money, she had to maintain a minimum balance, otherwise it was easy for others to notice something amiss. After the illusory gray fog dissipated, Audrey silently looked down at Susie, who was admiring the garden on the first floor, before pacing around and secretly clicking her tongue. Mr. World is really terrifying. Evening, in the seaweed bar. Having just squandered all his money at the casino, Blue Eyes Meath sat before a bar counter and ordered a cup of Lanty Proof. He was just about to raise the cup when he suddenly heard the bartender whisper to him with a suppressed voice, "Wormtongue Mither is dead." What? Who did it? Blue Eyes Meath was first alarmed before he asked excitedly, "Someone is challenging Vice Admiral Ailment?" An adventurer named Gehrman Sparrow. He wasn't known at all before. Who knew that he finished off Mither? The bartender didn't hide his shock and alarm. He also killed Oziel, the real boss of Amiris Leaf Bar, Strongman Oziel. Blue Eyes Meath was just about to sigh when he frowned suddenly. Back when Oziel's men came to ask him about blazing Danets, he had mentioned that the bosun of the Golden Dream was seen mixing in with an unknown adventurer. He had used a ritual to provide the corresponding portrait. Oziel is dead. Mither King is dead. It's done by an unknown adventurer named Gehrman Sparrow. Blue Eyes Meath suddenly trembled as a scene that left a deep impression on him surfaced in his mind. The young man that looked like a gentleman was standing by the entrance of the bar. He had black hair and brown eyes, with a thin and cut face. His eyes coldly observed the customers as though he was seeking out his prey. Blue Eyes Meath shuddered and couldn't be bothered with drinking his alcohol. He got up immediately and took wide strides out of the bar. Terrifying. That guy is too terrifying. Even Wormtongue died at his hands. He's definitely a powerhouse at the Admiral level. He will definitely seek me out and finish me off. No, I can't stay and buy him any longer. I have to return to the ship and be far away from here. Blue Eyes Meath ran to the Red Theater and forcibly pulled his companions with him. They headed for the woods and circled around to the private harbor ran by the Resistance. Opposite across the Red Theater, the herb store in the alley remained open. The chubby apothecary, Darkwill, was sitting behind the counter, wearing a calm expression, but internally, he was deeply worried. He had already contacted the Life School of Thought members he knew via various methods and sought their help. However, he had no idea who they were or when they would come. He could only bear with his fear and anxiety as he continued running the store, pretending as though nothing had happened. Darkwill, you're extremely uneasy. The chubby owl flew over from an unknown location and landed on the counter. There's no need for you to remind me. I know my state of mind very well. Darkwill waved his hands impatiently. He could still remember the times when he was still under his teacher's tutelage. He was often warned to be careful of the official Beyonder organizations and be careful of the true sanguine. In regards to this, Roy King raised several examples, such as being imprisoned underground forever, with no sunlight or woman to be seen, being made into experimental subjects where their bodies would be used to test the dangers of particular sealed artifacts. There, they would experience all kinds of experiments, and after mutating, they were monsters who acted on instinct. It was also possible to be sucked and eaten by the sanguine and made into puppets. These examples had deeply imprinted themselves in his mind. It made his already lacking courage vanish instantly. After leaving his teacher's side, he often stayed in a city for a short period of time, immediately leaving once there was a risk of exposure. Darkwill tried hard to keep his horror under control, placing his attention on the problem of rescuing his teacher. Old Man has been captured for some time. Why is he still imprisoned in the Governor General's office? With the military's abilities, they should be able to gather any information they wish to know. Be it an outright execution, the gathering of materials, or being used as an experimental subject, they would definitely move Old Man. Could it be that Old Man used some techniques to hide his secret, or they wished to make him into a spy? Sigh, just agree to it. Darkwill scratched his head as his thoughts wandered aimlessly. Gradually, he recalled the last letter he received from his teacher, Roy King. Old Man often likes to give hints and things that seem to be normal and ordinary matters. Could that letter contain similar information? That letter didn't say a thing. It just said to meet him near the Red Theater and flaunted his gambling techniques. Pooey. He clearly relies on luck. He even wanted me to go to Matt Street's Mabel's Sundry store and buy a die to make preparations to be educated. I thought I would buy it only after we met, so I haven't been there all this time. Perhaps there's a secret there? Darkwill was like a drowning man who seemed to clutch at a straw. Many of Byam's streets were named after Lone Kingdom cities. Darkwill used a few minutes to muster his courage, brought the owl with him, and closed the door to his shop before walking out of the alley. While waiting for the rental carriage, he bought a copy of the news report from a paperboy as he flipped through the international and domestic news, as well as news about the archipelago. Suddenly, he saw a familiar face. It was the adventurer who had informed him of Roy King's location. In the afternoon, Gehrman Sparrow killed Wormtongue Mither King, who's worth a bounty reaching £5,400. I actually entrusted a mission to such a powerful adventurer. Darkwill clicked his tongue. He soon threw the matter to the back of his mind and got onto the carriage and headed straight for Matt Street and found Mabel's Sundry store. The owner of the shop was a genial old lady who said after sizing him up, "The die you want costs £1. This is a robbery." Darkwill roared angrily in his head, but this only made him more certain that there might be clues hidden in the die. After paying, he received a tiny ring box and opened the lid. He saw a milky white six-sided die which had 4 red dots pointing up. Although he was puzzled with how ordinary the die looked and how it was stuffed tightly into the ring box with no remnant space, Darkwill still acted cautiously by not studying it on the spot. He placed it into his pocket and walked to another side of the street. When he came to a secluded spot, he couldn't help but give it a glance, unable to find any problems with it. At this moment, a carriage flew by and gave him a fright. His wrist trembled as he dropped the die on the ground. The die continued rolling and ultimately came to a stop, a single red dot pointing up. Darkwill cursed the carriage driver and widened his stride to pick it up. Just as he took this step, his body suddenly staggered, and he collapsed to the ground loudly despite the lack of any obstacles. All he saw were stars. His mind went blank for a moment as he lay there, the milky white die right in front of his eyes. Darkwill sprawled on the ground, momentarily forgetting to stand up. His mind remained blank. Ever since he had matured, he had never encountered a scenario of tripping himself. After consuming the potions, his body had experienced enhancements to a certain degree, making it even more impossible. Now, for some baffling reason, he had fallen down in an inexplicable manner. Did I step on something? Darkwill suddenly snapped to his senses as he struck down with his palm and rolled to his feet. He pretended as though the one who had just fallen wasn't him. He looked left and right without finding anything odd on the ground. Filled with puzzlement, he took a few difficult steps forward to pick up the milky white die. At this moment, a patrolling constable seemed to have sensed the disturbance as he jogged over with baton in hand while holding his other hand down on his revolver. Upon seeing this scene, Darkwill suddenly felt worried, feeling suspicious that he had fallen for a trap. "They caught old man but haven't come for me all this time. It's because they were secretly observing me and waiting for me to find some clues. Now, I've gotten my hands on this strange die, they've started taking action? The official Beyonders are here to catch me?" Darkwill instinctively turned around and ran, but he had suffered a rather heavy fall, causing him to feel pain in his knees. He was momentarily only able to walk. Seeing the patrolling constable approach him, and with him not being able to run, a scene of an underground prison instantly surfaced in Darkwill's mind. In an environment with only an everlasting candlelight, locked with Beyonders who would heave intensely like monsters. What happened? The patrolling constable pressed down on his revolver as he kept his distance and asked cautiously. Darkwill suddenly felt an irrepressible fear. As his wrist trembled, the milky white die he had just picked up fell to the ground again as it rolled a few times. This time, 6 red dots pointed up. Faced with the constable's scrutiny, Darkwill replied with a trembling voice, "I just stepped onto a damn banana skin and fell." The moment he said that, he felt his heart skip a beat. This was because there wasn't any banana skins on the ground. Damn it, I was too nervous. I should have said that I tripped myself. Darkwill thought in frustration. He decided to summon the owl perched on the roof opposite him, preparing to make a last stand. The patrolling constable gave him a glance and chuckled. "Make sure to watch where you place your feet when walking. I was imagining that you had been robbed." He released his palm on his revolver, raised his baton, and walked away. In a daze, Darkwill looked at the constable's back that was opening up a gap from him. He wasn't sure how the constable had so easily believed his excuse that was filled with mistakes. He retracted his gaze and looked at the milky white die which was sitting on the ground in silence. He slowly frowned. "I'm not pure Loanese. The constables here don't need to suck up to me. Could it be all thanks to this? Be it my strange fall or my weird way of convincing the constable, it was all because of this? Is this that important sealed artifact which teacher was taking care of?" Darkwill quickly made certain connections as he carefully proceeded forward. He picked up the die again and stuffed it into the extremely tiny ring box. In the box, the die had no room to roll. Signaling to his owl, Darkwill picked up the news report copy, stopped a rental carriage, and hobbled up. His destination, Red Theater. The carriage smoothly proceeded forward. Because dusk was setting in, the street lamps which were relatively far away didn't illuminate the area much. He wasn't in a rush to study the ring box or the die inside. He patiently waited until he returned home. After entering the herb store and heading up to the residential area on the second floor, he lit the wall lamp and chased the silly bird out of his room. He sat in front of his desk and repeatedly checked on the ring box and milky white die. Finally, he took out a folded piece of paper about the length of a finger segment from the bottom of the ring box. Darkwill inhaled silently as he quickly spread open the piece of paper and discovered that there were 3 paragraphs written in ancient Faesac. "If I didn't appear 3 days after the appointed time, then I must have been betrayed and have been arrested. Therefore, do not seek out help from the other members of the school of thought. This is because I'm unable to determine who did it. This will bring you great danger. There is only one thing that you need to do. Bring the die to Orvie Island and hand it to the bellman, Carnot, in the port city. My teacher, Ricardo, is hidden there. The subsequent matters will be handled by him. Don't worry that I'll divulge this secret once I finish writing this letter. All relevant memories would completely disappear. I wouldn't even remember having an apprentice like you until I'm rescued. Remember, try your best not to use the die. It has living characteristics. The more you use it, the easier it is for it to awaken. It will roll itself when you aren't watching it, even without any space. When it's at 1, please trust me when I say that you'll suffer from worse than a direct death. This is because almost everything you do will end in failure, including your bed activities. Indeed, this die is very dangerous." Darkwill subconsciously sighed and immediately realized the dumb act he had done out of goodwill. In order to rescue his teacher, Roy King, he overcame his cowardliness and remained in Byam, as well as sent out a cry for help to the Life School of Thought members. And according to the information, this meant that he might very well have been targeted by the person who betrayed Roy King. "Why didn't you say so earlier? No, why didn't I head out to buy the die earlier?" Darkwill raised his hands and yanked at his hair. He didn't dare stay any longer. He decided to leave his residence and buy a scalped ticket at night. He would head for Orvie Island early the next morning. That was an island that was on the route between the Rorstad Archipelago and Tosgarter Island. My charms, my revolver, my bullets. Darkwill quickly counted the items that could provide him with safety, feeling concern over his lack of combat strength. He quickly thought of an idea as he paced around and mumbled, "I need to hire a bodyguard." A bodyguard? Who should I hire? How much money must I spend? Amidst his thoughts, Darkwill's gaze swept across the news report copy which he had just brought back. Suddenly, he thought of an excellent bodyguard, Gehrman Sparrow. A powerful adventurer who could hunt a pirate worth 5,400 pounds. If he's willing to accept the mission, I should be able to successfully arrive at Orvie Island if the counselor doesn't take action. How can I find him? Right. I should paste notices in the bars where adventurers frequently appear. Darkwill nodded indiscernibly as he stuffed the items back into his packed suitcase. With this plump owl, he left the herb store once again, his heart feeling the pinch. In the seas beyond the Rorstad archipelago, in a small port belonging to Lone, the Black Death was docked there without any scruples. It was being surrounded by 3 ships. Vice Admiral Ailment Tracy, who had just taken a hot bath, wore a loose man's shirt, and she finished the final treatment for her mostly recovered wound. To a demoness, scars weren't a thing. At this moment, the blonde female attendant knocked on the door and entered the captain's cabin after receiving permission. When she saw Tracy, her cheeks flushed red as she moved her gaze away. "Captain, a telegram was sent from Byam to the port over here. Mither, _third mate has been killed." Tracy stopped her actions as her expression sank. She asked hesitantly, "Do you know who did it?" She had sent Wormtongue Mither to Byam to investigate the assassination attempt on her, firstly as a form of punishment for his dereliction of duty, and secondly, to spread the news that she was heavily injured so as to lure others who harbored malicious intent into attacking her. She never expected Mither to be able to make any breakthroughs or developments in a short period of time. After the demigod addressed as Death Consul by the Demoness of Unaging visited her, she had deliberately concealed this matter and didn't quickly inform Mither. She allowed the punishment to continue as she felt that it was naturally for the best if his investigations turned fruitful. Even if there was nothing, she wouldn't be too disappointed either. She never thought about the possibility of Mither being placed at risk, as it was a part of the punishment. But to her surprise, Mither had been killed so quickly. The blonde female attendant handed over the telegram and said, it was done by an adventurer named Gehrman Sparrow. It can be confirmed that he had used a beyonder power similar to Dragon's Might. Gehrman Sparrow. Dragon's Might. Heh. Kalangos also knew Dragon's Might. He likely grazed a psychiatrist or hypnotist with creeping hunger. Tracy sneered after receiving the telegram as she spoke to herself. She was quite certain that Gehrman Sparrow was the enemy who had disguised himself as Helene to attack her. Furthermore, he had been using the faceless powers which Kalangos had grazed. Creeping hunger is with him, and he has an ancient demigod, who Mother addressed as Death Consul, backing him. Does this mean that Kalangos was really killed by that Death Consul? Tracy muttered silently as she waved her hand to send the blonde attendant out. After the door to the captain's cabin closed, she chuckled to herself. If I were to divulge this information, the organization that ordered Kalangos to assassinate Duke Negan would definitely be very interested. For a brief moment of time, she really had the urge to do so, but her rationality stopped her. This was because it meant that she would directly offend the Death Consul. And with the single chance of him being recognized as the murderer, she would immediately be suspected of divulging the information. When the time comes, unless I hide back at Mother's side, I'll be under the shadow of death at any moment. I'm not afraid of other saints. They will have to find me before they can attack me. Besides, there will definitely be some indication of that, and a significant amount of time is needed. I will have sufficient chances to escape danger, but the Death Consul can travel using the spirit world. As long as he determines my location, he will quickly appear beside me. Tracy bit her lip as she thought in depression. She gave up her previous thoughts and decided to take note of Gehrman Sparrow's whereabouts. She wouldn't spare him once a good opportunity arose. At this moment, Klein was still living in the Tina Inn, waiting for his bounty to be delivered to him. 10 p.m. Swordfish Bar. After waiting an entire afternoon and having not received his bounty, Klein deliberately went out. He went to Kent and received the news that the process had been kick-started. However, he would only receive the money tomorrow morning. He disguised himself and participated in a private exchange among the adventurers in the Swordfish Bar, but he didn't find the main ingredients of the Nimblewright Master Potion or any mystical items. After restoring his appearance, Klein pressed down on his hat and attempted to squeeze through the crowd. He left the bar, which was in its rowdiest and noisiest time of the day. At this point, gazes swept past his face as most of them were momentarily taken aback before they clearly froze for 2 seconds, as though they had recognized something. Suddenly, they retracted their gaze and retreated far away from Klein like the receding tide. They had already learned of Gehrman Sparrow's appearance and strength in the papers and rumors. More details had gradually spread in areas where adventurers, pirates, and gang members gathered. Many people gained a basic understanding of the present situation and knew that Gehrman Sparrow had taken the crazy action of instantly drawing his revolver once he discovered Wormtongue Mythor King. Therefore, everyone knew better and chose to stay away from the dangerous man. The merchant, Ralph, was drinking in front of the bar when he suddenly sensed the disturbance. He instinctively half-turned his body around and looked over. He soon saw a quiet gentleman with a thin face and cut features, and the corresponding portrait which appeared on news reports surfaced in his mind, Gehrman Sparrow who hunted Wormtongue. Following that, Ralph recalled his conversation with resistance leader, Kalat, in the evening. He confirmed that the crazy adventurer before him wasn't averse to see God, and he had even witnessed the private trade between the resistance and Vice Admiral Iceberg. Perhaps I can develop him into being a believer of sea God. Even if he has no interest in the archipelago in the future, he might be able to provide certain help in certain matters. Ralph clasped his hands and held them to his mouth as though he was blowing at a sea conch. This was one of the gestures used to pray to sea god Calvetua. Then, he suddenly got up and walked to Gehrman Sparrow with a beer in hand. At this moment, Klein also noticed Ralph's approach and recognized him. That was a devout believer who was willing to offer up a third of his 20,000 gold-pound wealth to see God. That was the former pirate and the present merchant who he had convinced to set up a children's charity foundation. Based on the news regarding the charity foundation and his frequent pious praying, he understood Ralph in all aspects. Therefore, he was very puzzled as to why the man would attempt to approach Gehrman Sparrow. He has a job to entrust to me? Things that the resistance isn't able to do for some reason or another? Klein looked at Ralph as he slowed down his pace. Mr. Gehrman Sparrow? Ralph raised the cup of beer in his hand. Klein nodded and maintained his persona by saying, I don't know you. Haha, it's always so simple to get to know each other among adventurers. Perhaps a cup of beer is all it takes. Ralph pointed at the bar counter. Are you interested in a drink? All right, Klein was deeply puzzled as he answered simply. They sat in the corner of the bar as he ordered a cup of Southville beer. As he drank, he looked at Ralph without saying a word. Being stared at silently by a powerhouse at the level of a pirate admiral wasn't a good experience. Ralph drank a mouthful of beer to hide his high-strung nerves and laughed. I've heard about you. Before what you did today, I know that you're a true gentleman that shows no discrimination towards the natives of the colonial lands. Different things to say flashed through Klein's mind as he finally decided on a few sentences that corresponded to his persona. Get to the meat of the issue. Ralph nearly choked as he cleared his throat. Do I have the honor to introduce you to our god, the savior of the archipelago, the blessed of the sea, Calvetua? As you know, the sea is so vast. The storms are that terrifying. It's impossible to guarantee that one can defeat the various difficulties at sea and live on, even for the four kings. We need a god that can respond to you and hold authority over the sea and storm. Introducing me to myself and then getting me to believe in myself. Klein resisted the urge to twitch the corners of his face as he turned to say, I'm more interested in whether you have any mystical items, the kind that has powerful offensive strength. Ralph revealed an honest smile. We don't have any. However, as long as you piously believe in sea God, there might be a day when you would be bestowed with one. I don't have one. Don't make promises for me. Klein instantly found it amusing and laughable. He felt that he couldn't carry on the conversation. Hence, he downed his half-filled cup of Southville beer and said, I'll consider it. He was about to leave when the bartender suddenly came over and squeezed a smile. Mr. Gehrman Sparrow, someone entrusted you with a mission. What is it? Klein glanced at Ralph. Knowing his place, the latter left his seat with his beer. He was already very pleased with today's outcome. This was because he never had the intention of developing the crazy adventurer into a believer of sea God in one try. His goal was only to let him know of the possibility and to think about the pros and cons of doing so. After the silence in the corner of the bar resumed, the bar counter immediately said with a smile, he says he's an apothecary, you know. He has a mission to entrust to you. If you're interested, you can wait here for him. We will contact him with the previously established method. An apothecary I know? The chubby Darkwill? The Darkwill who rears a plump owl? What kind of mission would he have for me? Rescue his teacher, Roy King? That isn't something I will do. The risk is just too high. As his thoughts raced, Klein decided to first figure out the details of the mission. Okay. At nearly 11 p.m., Klein met the apprehensive Darkwill in billiard room 3 of the Swordfish Bar. He had already changed into a rather eye-catching witch doctor robe and was dressed as a native. He was in a taraba shirt, pantaloons, and a brown jacket. As for this round-faced owl, it was perched silently on his right shoulder, observing the adventurer with his penetrating eyes. It's very similar to the feeling of how Miss Justice observes the other members of the Tarot Club. This owl might really be a beyonder creature. A spectator? Klein made a judgment as he said in a deep tone without a change in expression, "What mission is it that you have?" "It's this." The chubby apothecary kept his left hand in his pocket and clenched the ring box tightly. "I'll be making a trip to another island. Heh, it will probably take 3 days. Due to certain developments, I might encounter danger. Of course, it might not happen as well. In short, I need a bodyguard, and I think you're the best choice." "The way you put it sounds like I'm actually not that impressive, it's just that you know a few people. You aren't rescuing your teacher and had chosen to leave Byam to seek out helpers? Or he has already been saved and the danger comes from the military's pursuit?" Klein pondered over the truth behind the matter as he calmly asked, "How great would the danger be?" Darkwill's lips trembled as he said, "I can't be sure, if the danger exceeds what you can handle, you can directly hand me over to the other party. This will be a promise we make now. It will not spoil your reputation. If I didn't know that you just have a nasty mouth, then I would have imagined this as a form of goading." Klein thought and said, "What kind of payment can you provide?" Darkwill originally wished to directly give the answer he had considered long ago, but he felt hesitant for a moment. This was because the matter was indeed very dangerous. Without enough chips, he couldn't move Gehrman Sparrow into agreeing. He was afraid of the appearance of the counselor, and that before the matter reached a level of despair, his bodyguard would give up resisting. This was also the reason why he had to hire a powerhouse. Klein glanced at him and coldly said, "You can first consider it for a moment. I'll use the washroom. Tell me your answer when I'm back." With that said, he turned around and walked to the door. Pulling the handle, he stepped outside. The way he responded made him seem experienced, having the coolness and coldness of an adventurer and bounty hunter, but in fact, he wasn't really giving the chubby apothecary time to think. He was only finding an opportunity to head to the washroom to divine the matter above the gray fog. This was key to whether he accepted the mission. Once he left the billiard room and arrived in front of a washroom. He got in line before finally getting an empty cubicle. When he entered, he frowned as the dirty environment and disgusting stench left him grossed out. He nearly turned his head and left. He held back his disgust as he pulled the flush lever in contempt. As he sighed at the terrible environment for his divination, he took 4 tiny steps counterclockwise and began the ritual. Inside the billiard room, Darkwill agilely went to close the door after he saw Gehrman Sparrow's back completely disappear. He asked the owl on his shoulder, "Will he betray me?" "No," the owl mumbled. "Also, when asking me questions, be polite. Call me Mr. Harry." The fat on Darkwill's face trembled. "Mr. Harry, what kind of payment do you think he will accept?" "I can't see through him. He's good at concealing his emotions," the owl said frankly. "Darn Mr. Harry. No, darn silly bird." Darkwill cursed inwardly as he paced around and considered the chips he could offer. After a while, Klein returned to billiard room 3 and asked, "Have you thought it through?" He had already divined above the gray fog that the mission's danger was acceptable, and he happened to plan on leaving Byam for the time being. £800 for 3 days, as well as our friendship. "I'm referring to the friendship of my teacher and his friends," Darkwill said without confidence. Klein remained silent for a few seconds and said, £1,000 for 3 days. In addition, your organization needs to help me obtain a mystical item with powerful offensive abilities. I will pay in cash based on a reasonable price. 1,000 pounds. How could I have that much? Darkwill hesitated for a moment before saying, I'll pay an advance of 300 pounds. The rest will be paid by the person I'm looking for when we arrive at my destination. He planned on getting his teacher's teacher to pay the rest. Klein nodded slightly and said, deal. Darkwill immediately heaved a sigh of relief before puffing his face and said with a smile, can I believe that the protection is in immediate effect? Upon hearing the chubby apothecary's question, Klein smiled inwardly as he wore a stoic expression. From the moment you make the first payment. Darkwill didn't hesitate to take out a huge wad of cash as he counted it while his heart pained for the money. Here's 300 pounds. You can carry out your promise. Klein received the notes and nodded. That wouldn't be an issue. Darkwill immediately felt relieved, as though he was a drowning person who had finally caught onto a float. Half an hour later, in the Tina Inn, Darkwill watched in a daze as the powerful adventurer, Gehrman Sparrow, said to the reception counter, switch us to a luxurious suite. With that said, Klein took 2 steps backward as though giving his spot to the chubby apothecary. Darkwill gulped his saliva and asked hesitantly, I'm paying? During the mission, all expenses are borne by the employer. This is the rule adventurers follow, Klein said without a change in expression. I'd be a dumbass if I believed you. Am I to help you pay if you call for a few red theater prostitutes? Darkwill thought as he squeezed out a smile. We can use an ordinary room. This will make Lee protection job easier. Then, you stay by yourself. Klein acted as Gehrman Sparrow without any effort. Darkwill laughed and walked to the counter and said without expression, a luxurious suite. When Darkwill finally checked in and entered the smaller bedroom, he opened the window and left an opening for the owl, Mr. Harry. He took out the ring box in his pocket and checked the situation of the strange die. After confirming that the die was the same as before, with 4 points facing up, Darkwill gradually heaved a sigh of relief. Backland. Inside an ordinary house. Woke up from his slumber, and the first thing he did was check on his body. This was something he had to repeat every day. This was because he had no idea what kind of story 0-08 would compose after he slept, bringing about unknown accidents. After confirming that he wasn't injured, Insangwil wore a pair of bright leather boots and stood up. Without any surprises, he saw 0-08 silently sitting on his desk as though it was an ordinary quill. However, it had been locked in a metal box that was covered with symbols and magic labels. Insangwil walked over with a heavy heart and grabbed 0-08. He flipped open the notebook beside him and discovered that there was another page of text. Insangwil couldn't recall what he had done last night, but he acutely sensed some problems. He looked into the mirror and found his reflection somewhat unfamiliar, as though his body had given birth to another Insangwil. He looked down and saw there were obvious abnormalities under his fingernails, but he couldn't recall what he had done the previous night no matter how hard he tried. After seeing this description, Insangwil instinctively looked at the full-body mirror in the room. He saw that he was still blind in one eye. His classic chiseled face didn't have a single wrinkle, but there was a smile lingering at the edges of his mouth. It formed a stark contrast with his heavy gaze. At this moment, Insangwil felt that his face was a little livid. He had eye bags, and it was matched with a smile he couldn't understand. He appeared sinister, vicious, and strange. He lifted his hands, lowered his head, and saw black stained blocks under his fingernails. It was as though he had spent half the night digging up roots in the garden. Although he had switched from the death pathway to the evernight pathway, and he had become a night watcher, Insangwil didn't lose the beyonder powers he had from before. He was still a powerful spirit guide in the domain of dead spirits. Therefore, he immediately planned to communicate with the spirits inside and outside the house to figure out what had happened last night. At this point, he saw the final passage on the notebook through the corner of his eye. Insangwil attempted to channel spirits, but sadly he realized that it was to no avail. It was as though a person of a similar profession had wiped out all clues. He was very worried, unaware of what he had embroiled himself with the previous night. Insangwil's expression turned heavy as he attempted to channel spirits. Within his expectations, he didn't receive any outcome which could be called a pleasant surprise. Wednesday morning, outside a Mirror's Leaf bar that had its shadow boss replaced. Klein circled around to a secluded alley and saw Ozkent carrying a tiny suitcase. "Your bounty." Ozkent threw the small suitcase over. This actually wasn't the bounty money in the true sense of the word. It was money the military had put forth. The former involved the Governor-General's office and the kingdom's finance ministry. The procedure was complicated and needed at least 3 days to complete. Klein caught the suitcase and opened it on the spot. He saw stacks of neatly arranged cash, with most of them in £1 or £5 denominations. A total of £5,400. "We didn't take a cut," Ozkent said as he forced a smile. If it were any other adventurer, he would have given £4,000 at most. The rest was the income for the personnel involved in the entire procedure. But faced with the crazy man whose strength was close to a pirate admiral, all he could do was volunteer work thanks to his fear of being executed on the spot by him. "The military is unlikely to fool me with fake notes." Klein grabbed a stack of cash and waved it. £5,400. Hiding outside the alley, Darkwill heard Ozkent's words and secretly shot a glance at the suitcase. The stacks of pound notes seemed to blind him. This was the first time he was seeing so much money placed together. An adventurer really is a profitable profession. Successfully hunting a pirate earns thousands of pounds. Protecting me nets him £1,000 and one request. Occasionally, he can find sunken ships and treasure. Why did I become an apothecary instead of an adventurer? If I had known, I would have chosen that lucky beyonder pathway. Darkwill thought with atypical admiration. However, he quickly recalled his reality. Most adventurers didn't live such rich lives. Even if they could make a killing, a third of their income was given to apothecaries, either to treat their injuries and remove any latent injuries, or to buy medicine to add to the fun and deal with unmentionable diseases. It's still safer being an apothecary. Darkwill sighed inwardly. At this moment, Klein, who had only did a rough count of the money, closed the suitcase and said to Ozkent, "I'll be leaving Byam for some time. If I have any intel, how should I inform you?" "You're leaving Byam?" Ozkent asked, finding it odd. Klein nodded slightly and said, "I received a bodyguard mission." Ozkent was first enlightened before he felt a baffling sense of ease. If this madman were to stay in Byam for long periods of time, there will ultimately be a day where he causes problems. It's better to drift out at sea and fight those pirates. Ozkent immediately said with a smile, "You can directly send me a telegram and include my address. We have people planted at the telegraph office." "All right." Dressed in a black tweed coat, Klein didn't speak further. With the suitcase in hand, he turned to leave the alley. He headed for the harbor together with Darkwill and planned to catch the earliest liner to Orvie Island. The owl flew in between the trees and appeared furtively. They had already bought scalped tickets the night before. Half an hour before they boarded the ship, Darkwill reeled with anxiety. He was afraid the person who had betrayed his teacher would suddenly rush over and attack him. This feeling continued until he entered the first-class cabin that belonged to him. As long as the liner went out into the sea, beyonders without flight capabilities or their own ships would find it difficult to intercept him. "Quickly start the ship. Quickly start the ship." Darkwill looked out the window as he muttered to himself. At this moment, the owl had followed and perched on his left shoulder. Klein sat on a chair in the room, prepared for any possible attacks. At this moment, the sky suddenly turned dark as the wind howled with increasing strength. The air's humidity also clearly climbed. "A storm?" Darkwill widened his mouth as he blurted out. This meant that the ship might not set sail at the scheduled time. It might be delayed for hours. And with that, Darkwill wouldn't be able to withstand many of the unnecessary risks. He turned his head to look at Gehrman Sparrow and forced a smile. "Do you have any solutions?" "I do have one." For example, you can immediately pray to see God Calvetua, and I'll immediately answer your prayer above the gray fog. I'll disperse the storm. But it's without a doubt that in minutes, or maybe seconds, King John Cotman will rush over. And his attacks will arrive earlier. Klein looked at the chubby apothecary and said calmly, I'm only an adventurer. Darkwell knew that he shouldn't have had any expectations. He cursed the weather silently and turned around, looking out the window to check on the exact situation. Boom! A silver bolt of lightning struck Darkwell before Klein could even react. Darkwell immediately collapsed, convulsing as smoke emitted from his body. His skin was charred as snakes of lightning buzzed. Klein nearly fell into a shock. This was the first time he was seeing someone getting struck by lightning during a storm. That's way too unlucky, right? He briefly forgot to rescue Darkwell. The owl, Mr. Harry, was similarly stunned for a few seconds before it screamed, Quick! Quick! There's a bottle of medicine in the second secret pocket on his left. Feed it to him. This owl can talk. Klein pricked up his brows, took a few steps forward, bent down, and found a bottle of blood-red medicine. Then, he poured it down Darkwell's throat. After a few minutes, Darkwell finally regained his senses. As charred black skin peeled off, he stood up with great difficulty. I'll deal with my wounds. He staggered to his room and locked the door. After doing all of that, he took out the ring box and opened it with a solemn look. In the ring box with almost no room to roll, the milky white die had already changed at some point in time. 2 red dots were facing up. In the living room outside, Klein stood on the spot and recalled everything that had happened before frowning. At this moment in time, he had a baffling feeling that the enemies he would face during this bodyguard mission was probably going to be different from the enemies he encountered in the past. After Darkwell partially recovered and came out, Klein sat on the chair and leaned forward slightly. Explain. This determines how I should provide you with protection. Upon hearing Gehrman Sparrow, Darkwell's first reaction was to reveal everything about the strange die. He wanted this adventurer, that he had spent huge sums of money on, to grasp the problem at its root so as to effectively ensure his personal safety. But on second thought, he recalled his teacher's exhortations. Believing that the die might very well be a rather important sealed artifact of the life school of thought, he was afraid that the truth would entice him to cause even more negative developments. There are plenty of rumors about adventurers who killed their employers during missions in order to earn greater benefits for themselves. I don't know Gehrman Sparrow, and I have no idea what kind of character he has. I need to be cautious. Besides, the die had automatically rolled a 2. The situation isn't at its worst and most despair-inducing. I can still wait for a chance. Darkwell hesitated for a few seconds and finally decided to talk about superficial matters while avoiding the key points. He subconsciously dodged Gehrman Sparrow's seemingly calm eyes. It's this. My teacher and I belong to a secret organization. I'm escaping because a traitor has appeared internally. They grasp the pathway related to fate and can make themselves sufficiently lucky and their target unlucky. I might have been cursed, so I was unlucky enough to be struck by lightning. After the explanation, he forcefully hid the nervousness in his heart and awaited Gehrman Sparrow's reply. Will he believe me? This kind of adventurer with rich experience and strength is likely hard to deceive. If he were to discover that I'm lying, he will likely sink me into the ocean. Darkwell stood there anxiously, like a student being summoned to the teacher's desk. He's indeed from the life school of thought. Monster pathway. Klein nodded in thought. I understand. Try to do as little as possible. I will consider how I'll deal with your bad luck. Find authorized novels and web novel faster updates. Better experience, please click www.novelhall.com for visiting. Darkwell was taken aback, completely unable to believe that Gehrman Sparrow would so easily accept a lie he fabricated on the spot. He forced a smile and quickly expressed his gratitude. Then, he returned to his room, leaning his back against the door as he took out the ring box. Pa! His hand trembled as he opened the lid, only to discover that the milky white die had already strangely rolled itself to have the 6th side facing up. Does this mean that I was lucky enough to successfully fool Gehrman Sparrow? Darkwill thought in enlightenment. Mr. Harry swooped down and didn't choose to perch on the chubby apothecary's shoulder. Apparently, it was still somewhat worried about how it could have also been implicated when Darkwill was nearly struck by lightning. It stood on a wooden desk and stared ahead with its round eyes. Darkwill, you're very nervous. You don't have to tell me that, Darkwill said in frustration. The owl spread its wings and said, all right, I'll use a different explanation. I believe I should consider changing owners. Gehrman Sparrow seems to be a pretty good choice. Then what about me? Darkwill asked in surprise, momentarily forgetting his anger. Mr. Harry sked and said, don't you sense the concern and fear in your heart? You're already suspecting whether you can see tomorrow's sun. That strange die is really, really dangerous. If I were you, I would have thrown it out the window and into the sea and get your teacher's teacher to fish it out himself. How do you know about my teacher's teacher? Darkwill blurted out the question. Mr. Harry proudly lifted its head and said, don't doubt an owl's vision. Darkwill fell into thought and didn't faze himself with its answer. No, that won't work. Throwing the die into the sea wouldn't resolve all my problems. According to Old Man, even if it's buried out at sea, any powerful person will be able to find it in days. That will mean that I'll really lose it. Silly bird. You lack general knowledge and mysticism, and you don't know how some important sealed artifacts are just like the most popular prostitutes in Red Theater. They'll always be able to attract hungry men. Including you, Harry calmly replied. As for the problem of being lacking in general knowledge and mysticism, I believe a famous quote can explain it. Emperor Roselle once said that if a child doesn't receive a good education, then it's the father's fault. This sentence can also be used to describe problems between a pet and its owner. Alright, Darkwill, regardless, I believe you need to discuss the die with Gehrman Sparrow. Otherwise, there will only be greater danger. Let me wait and see a little longer. Perhaps it will be fixed at 6. Darkwill said with some hesitation. He sat on the edge of the bed before lying down. At this moment, the storm that had been howling had gradually calmed down. The sky began to turn calm as the liner blew its horn, indicating that it was setting sail. Inside the first-class cabin's living room, Klein looked out the window and saw blurry rainbows that appeared after the rain. Yet, his heart wasn't calm. He wasn't too afraid of enemies. Out at sea, apart from the 4 kings and the official demigods, or the pirate admirals who appeared with their fleet, there were very few matters that could threaten him, who had creeping hunger and several mystical items. Even if the ship was sunk, he was able to escape thanks to the many charms he had from the sea god domain. But luck was something he really had no confidence in. It wasn't within the limits of his abilities, nor could he think of a way to handle it. Although my title is the King of Yellow and Black who wields good luck, that was modified from the luck enhancement ritual. And the luck enhancement ritual clearly wasn't to allow people to get out of bad luck. Darkwill's matter is quite difficult to handle. I can only invest more effort into keeping a close eye on his situation. I'll immediately rescue him if something unlucky that can cause death happens. Let's hope that we can last for these few days until we arrived at Orvie Island. His seniors should be able to help him change his luck. Klein rubbed his temples, but he didn't show any abnormalities. Darkwill, who had been too nervous the previous night, fell into a deep sleep without realizing it. After a while, his stomach's growling informed him that it was time for lunch. He tried hard to open his eyes, but he felt as though an invisible person was pressing down on him, making it impossible for him to move. He felt the back of his head swelling with a sharp pain. He felt his breathing become more difficult as his heart raced at an abnormal pace. Don't tell me that I'm going to experience a sudden death in my dreams. Darkwill struggled with all his might, but he failed to wake up. He became weaker and weaker with time. At this moment, his mouth was opened up by a sharp object as an ice-cold liquid was poured in. The liquid also flowed down his face, wetting his chin and neck. Darkwill's body recovered as he finally managed to open his eyes. he saw two bright, round, gold-like eyes nearly slamming into his head. Rearing a beyonder pet can be quite effective sometimes. Darkwill first felt wistful before he rapidly sat up and took out the ring box. Inside, the die had rolled to another side. 1 point. So unlucky that I almost died in my sleep? No, I don't think it's that simple. It seems to magnify certain probabilities such as the chances of being hit by lightning or the chances of experiencing sudden death while asleep. No, this can't carry on. If this continues, I'll definitely die. Darkwill thought in hysteria. Horror quickly overwhelmed his thoughts as he spurred his hand to hold onto the ring box and rushed to the door. Perhaps as a result of nearly suffering a sudden death, he was lacking in strength. He could hardly twist the handle. Help! Help! Mr. Harry screamed sharply. Bang! The door was opened, slamming into Darkwill's head. If Klein hadn't controlled his strength, the chubby apothecary's head probably would have cracked open with blood spewing out everywhere. Without even rubbing his bruise, Darkwill frantically shouted, "It's this! It's this! It's this die that gives me bad luck. When it's at 1 point, I'll fail at everything I do." He had already decided to inform Gehrman Sparrow of the whole truth, and he looked forward to the powerful adventurer giving him some effective suggestions. He didn't eliminate the possibility of him killing him out of greed, but he had weighed the matter. If he had to make a choice, he definitely chose the one which wasn't as terrible. Telling Gehrman Sparrow might lead to death, but not telling him would spell certain death. This choice was no longer something that needed consideration. I don't care if the die is lost. My life is more important. Darkwill thought with righteous indignation. Then, he saw a smile appear across Gehrman Sparrow's mouth. Thank you for your humor. The joke isn't too bad. It's not a joke. Darkwill looked down at the ring box and saw that there were no changes to the blood-red single point on the die. See, could it be that even an explanation with plenty of logic will fail? The chubby apothecary suddenly fell into despair. It's real. He's speaking the truth. Harry flapped its wings. Darkwill, who felt hope arise in him, heard Gehrman Sparrow say in a deep voice, "Then why don't you throw it into the ocean?" With that said, Klein politely closed the door and returned to the living room. This fellow must be hiding a secret. I mustn't be fooled by such a clumsy excuse. Klein sat in his chair and waited for Darkwill to describe the situation in detail. Darkwill sat down, depressed. He sat there motionless, afraid of encountering another failure. He didn't notice that the die had already switched its face again to a 3. Before lunch, Klein entered the washroom to clean out his digestive system. After washing his hands, he went above the gray fog in passing, preparing to browse through the prayers of the sea god believers. Just as he sat at the high-back chair of the fool, he suddenly recalled many details as his eyes widened. How could I believe such a weak explanation? Why do I think that it's because of that die? In the past 2 events, it felt like my mind had been clouded. No, it's not that. Darkwill's explanation happened to match certain theories of mine. Therefore, I instinctively believed it to be real and fake. Klein's eyes constricted as he thought about it. At that moment, he had already made a judgment. That die is indeed problematic. Above the gray fog, inside the palace that looked like a giant's residence. Klein tapped the edge of the mottled table as his thoughts revolved around the strange die. It can influence me without me realizing it. This is already somewhat similar to 0-08 from back then. It's just that one is right in front of me, while the other is hidden. It's definitely a sealed artifact, and it's the kind that exists at the very pinnacle. Even if it's not a grade 0, it has to be a very special existence among grade 1s. I'm temporarily unable to interfere with matters regarding fate, but I can't just passively face it. With the passage of time, objects at the level of sealed artifacts will often cause more severe damage. It might begin to affect people around the chubby apothecary, such as me or all the passengers on the ship. Klein thought over the matter seriously without any solutions in mind. He decided to immediately return to the real world. He didn't know how to seal the die or how to reduce its influence, but he knew someone had a clue. It was the snake of Mercury, Wuxia, who was still inside his mother's womb as a fetus. Entering the master bedroom, he took out the paper crane in his wallet and placed it on the table. Klein took a look at the surface, which still had signs of being erased. He picked up a pencil and wrote a simple question: how do I deal with that die? He folded the paper crane back to its original form, stuffed it in his wallet, and went to the door of the servant's room before knocking on it twice. This wasn't in violation of Gehrman Sparrow's persona, because he was a gentlemanly madman. Of course, Klein was mainly afraid of bashing Darkwill to death by rashly opening the door. This was something that he had learned from the movie franchise, Final Destination. In addition, Klein was also worried about witnessing something disgusting or unpleasant. With the preferences Darkwill has exhibited, when he realizes that he's in extreme danger and unable to extricate himself from it, with waiting for death being the only option available to him, there's a non-zero chance of him pleasuring himself to climax one last time. Klein lampooned as he heard the chubby apothecary's weak reply, "What's the matter? It's good that you aren't dead yet." Klein carefully opened the door and leaned his body a little forward, looking at Darkwill and the opened ring box which was sitting in front of him. He calmly asked, "What's the score? Can't you check it from the papers yourself?" Sports section. Darkwill remained listless. "I'm asking about the die," Klein simply added. "It's still at 3 points. Darkwill first answered instinctively before turning his head and jumping up. "You believe me?" Klein didn't reply so as to prevent him from recalling how Gehrman Sparrow had been fooled by the die. He turned around and said in an unperturbed tone, "Bring the die outside." "All right. All right." Darkwill and Harry cried out in joy almost at the same time. They either raised their arms or wings. After the chubby apothecary carefully carried the ring box out, Klein pointed at the coffee table and said, "Put it on there." As he said, he sat on the sofa beside it. He placed his arms on his thigh and leaned forward to observe the strange die. On the surface, the die didn't seem strange in any way when it came to mysticism. The only difference from an ordinary die was that it was dyed in red, even for 3 points. Klein didn't touch it out of caution. He slightly straightened his body and looked at Darkwill, who was seated across him on a chair, as well as the fat owl, Harry, who was perched on the chair's back. "Describe the exact situation." Darkwill didn't hide the matter any further as he said with a smile which looked worse than crying, "This is an important sealed artifact in our organization. My mission is to send it to a particular person in Orvie Island. But, as you can see, it's extremely dangerous. It will roll itself even when there's no space for it to do so. When it rolls a 6, the wielder will be sufficiently lucky. Everything can be done with relatively easy success, just like how my clumsy lie was able to fool you. Don't mention this matter. You will one day be taught a serious lesson because of that mouth of yours." Klein listened with a stoic expression. Darkwill continued, "1 point means that the wielder will be extremely unlucky. Nothing will succeed, you wouldn't believe me even if I were to tell you the whole truth. 2 points should be bad luck of a lesser degree, but as for why it would cause me to be struck by lightning, it's inexplicable. 3 points and 4 points are normal levels of bad luck and good luck. This can be confirmed. 5 points is the opposite of 2 points. You are considered unlucky enough, otherwise, I would have already beaten you up." Klein thought and calmly instructed, "From this moment forth, both of you will take turns to monitor this die. Once it drops below 3 points, you are to inform me immediately." "Both of us?" Darkwill wore a blank look for a moment. "Including me?" The owl perched on the edge of the chair's back raised its right wing. Klein leaned back into the sofa and crossed his right leg as he said calmly, "This will help in maintaining focus and energy." With that said, he gestured at the owl with his chin. "You're up first." "My name is Harry," the owl grumbled. "Harry." Klein resisted the urge to laugh as he said to Darkwill, "Pull the bell and get an attendant here. From this moment forth, we will choose to have room service for our meals. Before reaching Orvie Island, you have to be in the living room at all times. You are not to go anywhere. Even if you wish to use the washroom, it will be when it's at 3 or 4. If you really can't hold it in, I'll give you a bucket. Upon hearing Gehrman Sparrow give instructions with regularity and thoroughness, Darkwill calmed down a little at a time. He was no longer as horrified as before. The matter he was most worried about prior to this was that firstly, Gehrman Sparrow would be enticed by greed and choose to kill him for the die. Secondly, this somewhat crazy and cold adventurer might be frightened by the die, and that he would choose to terminate the mission and stop providing protection. And now, Gehrman Sparrow didn't show any fear, and he even seemed very confident. Darkwill secretly sighed in relief and thought, his performance was really professional. He isn't afraid at all. He can even escape the influence of the die and accept my explanation. He lives up to his name of being the powerful adventurer who easily hunted Wormtongue. He's definitely a powerhouse at the Pirate Admiral level. Darkwill stood up and walked to the door to pull the service bell. Just as he returned to the sofa, he heard Harry's sharp screech. It has changed. It has changed. 2 points. Suddenly, Klein exerted strength in his legs as he rose up from the sofa without warning and rushed to Darkwill's side. Bang! As a gunshot rang from outside, Klein pulled Darkwill's arm, swung his arm backward, and shook his wrist, throwing the chubby apothecary to the side. At this point, in the wall opposite to where Darkwill was standing, there was a bullet hole. Find authorized novels and webnovel faster updates. Better experience, please click www.novelhall.com for visiting. Did a sailor's gun misfire? Or did the bullet ricochet when aiming at some seabird or something? Regardless of the situation, the chances of that happening are very low, yet. Klein turned his head to the chubby apothecary. Are you injured? Darkwill shook his head with a lingering sense of fear. I'm fine. In the time that followed, Klein resolved more than 10 accidents, one after another. It included the sudden collapse of the chandelier in the room, a hammer dropped by a slipping maintenance worker headed straight for Darkwill's head, as well as Darkwill nearly dying from choking on a fishbone. These didn't seem like anything serious, but for Klein to remain highly focused, it was inevitable for him to be exhausted. Thankfully, the die automatically rolled to 4 points later, finally ending the hour which was fraught with disasters. No, I can't continue like this. Who knows if something will happen to me when I'm rescuing him. Klein sent away the captain, who came to apologize and said to Darkwill, I'll sleep for half an hour. Both of you are to watch the die. Immediately wake me up when there's a problem. The chubby apothecary and the owl nodded like a hungry woodpecker. Leaning back into the sofa, Klein used cogitation to quickly fall asleep, hoping to receive a reply from Wiloseptin. When he woke up in his dream, he heaved a sigh of relief when he saw the pitch-black desolate plains. He followed the same old path and reached the depths of the black steeple. In the protruded ground surrounded by tarot cards, there were many new silvery lines that were densely written. Klein stopped walking and quickly read it. It's called the Die of Probability. It's a sealed artifact of the highest level in our school of thought. I believe it can reach the standard of a grade 0 sealed artifact. It controls the probability of everything. 1 point will maximize the probability of unfavorable matters occurring to the target. 2 points will raise the probability of unfavorable matters greatly. This doesn't mean that 2 points is safer than 1 point. This is because once the probability is high enough, any accident can happen. 3 points is to increase the probability of unfavorable matters. It's the opposite for 4 to 6 points. Even for me, a being who can reset it to a certain extent, it's a rather dangerous sealed artifact. A demigod can be killed using it, but of course, it can also kill yourself. I know, your contest with the Die of Probability is likely the equivalent to the battle between the god of save and load and the RNG gods. Klein lampooned inwardly as he continued reading. The Die of Probability has living characteristics. It always makes the wielder swing back and forth between having good and bad luck. If one isn't careful, it's possible to die from an accident. When it awakens to a certain degree, it will control the people and objects around the wielder, controlling the probability of their actions. Although it hasn't been confirmed, I suspect that given enough time, it will be able to influence the entire world, making every action of all life be determined by its score. Of course, this is excluding deities. To put it simply, it's digitizing the entire world. This is definitely at the level of a grade 0 sealed artifact. It's extremely dangerous. How terrifying. Klein couldn't help but frown as he eagerly continued reading. To truly seal the die of probability is rather complicated. To put it simply, it's to use specific sealed artifacts to isolate it from the spirit world, astral world, and the real world. You can give it a try. Haha, I'll reveal my cards. I have long discovered that you can resist my prophetic senses. Perhaps you can use it to seal it. There's another way, but it can only briefly reduce its influence. However, this should be enough to send the die of probability to the hands of someone who can seal it. That method is to use the fact that it has living characteristics. Use an effective method to intimidate it. That way, it will behave, calm down for a period of time. It will last about 12 hours before continuing. After repeated acts of intimidation, the influence it receives will decrease. After a week, it will mark you and madly control your probabilities. Finally, thank you for your help. Sincerely yours, Wuxia. As expected of a snake of fate. He has indeed discovered my uniqueness. Throwing the die of probability above the gray fog should be able to seal it. But the problem is that a grade 0 sealed artifact with living characteristics might influence the space above the gray fog and chase me away, making itself the owner. Such matters cannot be answered with divination. It will definitely be able to resist, just like 0-08. Klein rejected the idea of using the gray fog. As the thoughts whirled in his mind, he suddenly had an idea. Klein quickly left his dream and woke up. He said to Dark Will, I have a method of suppressing its influence. What is it? Dark Will asked in pleasant surprise. Klein didn't answer and picked up the die of probability, which had 4 points facing up, before entering the washroom. What does he want to do? I remember that in some folklore, the way they treat evil objects is to throw **T. Ugh. Dark Will didn't wish to think further. After entering the washroom and locking the door, Klein immediately set up a ritual to summon himself. Following that, he went above the gray fog and brought out the iron cigar case. Then, he picked up the die of probability and opened the cigar case. Inside the cigar case was the all-black eye which came from the Nimblewright Master. Under the darkness, Klein's face was cloaked in the shadows and he watched with a deep and gloomy gaze as he brought the die of probability close to the strange eye. It was a beyonder characteristic which contained the true creator's mental corruption. The corners of his mouth cracked open as he revealed a genial smile and whispered to the die in his hand, Here, let me treat you to a concert. It's a reference to how gamers will try attempt to save and load the game to beat a game's RNG for a better item random number generator. The window of the washroom was very high, preventing sufficient sunlight from shining in. It could only barely dispel the darkness, making everything seem gloomy. Klein moved the die of probability in his right hand to the all-black eye, and suddenly, it shook. Then, he threw the item into the other side of the wash basin. The milky white die rolled a few times before finally stopping with 4 red dots pointing up. Klein held back his unobvious smile and took a step to the side and picked up the die of probability again. He lowered his head and said in a gentlemanly manner, You don't wish to listen to it? Let's do this. Give me an answer. 6 represents cooperation, while everything else represents a rejection. With that said, he threw the die of probability up and reached out to catch it. The milky white die fell straight down and rapidly rolled, showing 6 red dots. Very good, Klein praised with a chuckle. After throwing the all-black eye back above the gray fog, he turned to open the door to the washroom and slowly walked to the living room. Under Dark Will's and Harry's gaze, which was filled with anticipation, worry, curiosity, and puzzlement, he suddenly stopped and threw the die of probability out. Find authorized novels and web novel faster updates. Better experience, please click www.novelhall.com for visiting. No. Darkwill and the owl cried out at the same time, afraid that a score of 3 points and below would happen. The latter subconsciously flew up to distance itself from the fatty who might be struck by lightning. With a crisp tinkle, the milky white die rolled on the coffee table several times before fixing itself at 2 points. Just as the color in Darkwill's face drained, the die languidly rolled and fixed itself on 4. For the next 12 hours, it will be relatively quiet. Klein calmly sat down and began enjoying his breakfast, which had long turned cold. He really had a solution? Darkwill lowered his body and stared at the strange die on the coffee table. After nearly a minute, he couldn't help but extend his hand and throw the die, managing to roll a 6. Just as his palm left, the die moved by itself to 4. How magical. What method did Gehrman Sparrow actually use? Did he really sh*t and soak the die inside? Ugh. Darkwill decided to accept the outcome and stopped thinking of the reason, otherwise, he suspected that he would end up vomiting. Looking up at Gehrman Sparrow, who was calmly spreading butter on his bread, Darkwill suddenly felt that with just a promise and 1,000 pounds to hire a bodyguard at this level was extremely worth it. He can definitely be ranked at the same level as any pirate admiral. If a tycoon were to encounter a situation like mine, they wouldn't hesitate to hire him with half their wealth. Thankfully, I only paid 300 pounds. The rest will be borne by teacher and the others. Darkwill felt relieved when he realized that he didn't need to worry about the die's random rolling for the next 12 hours. He couldn't help but stand up and stretch his back. He walked to the window and opened the tightly shut window to see the sparse clouds scattered across the clear skies. The endless azure blue sky stirred as it reflected the bright sunlight like it had countless golden fragments scattered in it. This energized Darkwill as he felt a burden be lifted from his chest. Unlike Backland, which would only become warm at the end of February, the Rorstad archipelago was no longer plagued by the cold. Life had returned to this area. Facing the sea and the blooming of flowers in warm spring. Klein, who had finished his bread, walked to a spot behind Darkwill and felt like he was an animal who had awoken from hibernation. He didn't recite the poem that flashed past his mind, as firstly, it didn't suit Gehrman Sparrow's persona, and secondly, it would probably make Darkwill reflect over Emperor Roselle's poetic talent. Until the evening, the die still didn't roll, but the weather had changed. Strong winds howled as dark clouds gathered. A storm was brewing. This was the most common danger at sea. Even if one took a safe sea route which had been traversed by others, one would occasionally encounter similar situations. It just wasn't as terrifying. Klein looked at the tall waves and the dark sky, and he felt as though the ship was cruising through a mountain valley. By the sides were tall dark blue cliffs that could topple down at any moment. The intense pressure made a mid-sequence beyonder like him feel repressed. He even wished to pray to God, hoping that the liner would cruise through the storm safely. It's no wonder sailors, pirates, and merchants who live on the sea for extended periods of time can't help but respect the Lord of Storms. They would more or less believe in him. Klein sighed in silence. Although he didn't believe the storm that wasn't that powerful could bury a liner which was powered by both sails and steam engines, he still attached caution to the matter by praying to his alternate identity, sea god Calvetua. He was afraid that the die of probability would suddenly go crazy during the storm and roll a 1, causing the ship to sink to the bottom of the sea. Therefore, he decided to make preemptive precautions. Klein did believe Snake of Fate will acceptance judgment that the die of probability would be quiet for 12 hours after the first intimidation act, but this was without any additional conditions. He believed that it was more likely that a sealed artifact with living characteristics would deal with situations like a person instead of rules. Hence, he had to take precautions for any troubles it might cause. Stealing a glance at Darkwill and the owl who were looking somewhat uneasy due to the storm, Klein calmly said, "I'll take a nap. Continue watching the die. Take turns and do not relax." "All right." Watching Gehrman Sparrow enter the master bedroom, Darkwill walked to the side of the coffee table and sat down. As he stared at the die, he asked Harry, "What thoughts do you have now?" Harry flew around and mumbled, "Why am I not a petrel?" In the master bedroom, Klein went above the gray fog and summoned the sea god's scepter from the junk pile. He held the scepter with blue gems embedded at the top and quickly replied to his prayer. Klein didn't expend too much of his spirituality to calm the storm. This was firstly because they weren't too far from the surrounding seas of the Rorstad archipelago. Such an obvious and exaggerated supernatural phenomenon was easily able to attract the attention of Sea King John Cotman, who shared the same domain, or the storm priests on the ships. Secondly, he had to conserve strength to deal with the die of probability. What he did was simple. He augmented the ship with layers of Beyonder effects, allowing it to cruise through the storm stably without any risk of capsizing. Towards a sequence 5 or 6 Beyonder below the rank of demigod, to do something similar to a liner which had hundreds of people on board required plenty of preparations and a complicated ritual. It was only possible by exhausting them, but to a sea god of this domain, it was all simple and easy. A demigod already has inklings of a god. Klein sighed and threw the scepter back into the junk pile, before silently disappearing from above the gray fog. In the time that followed, the ship bobbed up and down like a leaf in the wind, but no matter how terrifying or towering the dark blue waves were, nothing happened to it until the end of the storm. At 4 p.m. on Thursday. Backlund, William Street. Furswall once again arrived here by carriage. She didn't sit in the coffee shop again. Instead, she strolled down the street and observed the pedestrians and surrounding buildings. She also took note of figures with special traits as material for her novel. There really are a lot of foreigners. They're still mainly from Fasak and Intis. Heh, one of them is a barbaric and stocky white bear, while the other is a colorful, ostentatious rooster. Furs chuckled silently to herself. At this moment, she came to the middle of William Street where there was an abandoned chapel. Withered vines crawled over its walls, and gray stones were strewn everywhere. With the intention to not waste Mr. World's payment, Furs deliberately approached it to check for any abnormalities. She circled around the chapel without discovering anything. Following that, she entered and avoided the disgusting shit and rotten things, and she quickly observed every corner. Suddenly, her gaze came to a stop as she frowned bit by bit. In a particular corner of the half-collapsed ruin, the ground had been dug up by someone. The pit wasn't too big or deep, and there were remnant traces of it being dug with fingers. This should be considered an abnormality, right? Furs cautiously retreated and didn't do a detailed investigation. After walking through all of William Street, she immediately returned home and organized the abnormality and material she jotted down together. She then sacrificed it to Mr. Fool and asked him to hand it over to the world. Furs didn't conceal anything she saw, even if they didn't seem to have any superficial problems. This was because she knew very well that any abnormality would be judged by the world, and not by herself who didn't understand the situation. In the ancient palace above the fog, Klein immediately began reading the report Miss Magician had submitted. That abandoned chapel has signs of being dug up? The previous digging attempts had been dealt with by me and Miss Sharon. Who would dig it up again? Rafter Pound, that descendant of the Tudor family? He nearly died from the evil spirit's possession. Without any helpers, it's unlikely he would take further risks. Who could it be? Klein thought for a moment, but he couldn't lock onto a suspect. All he could do was continue reading. While he read the notes written in a beautiful language, he acutely noticed a point. There are many foreigners on this street. They are mainly from Fasak and Intis. It wasn't like that back when I went to William Street. Did a Fasak or Intis company recently open there? Fasak, Intis. Klein ruminated over the two countries' names when he suddenly recalled something. The royal family of the Fasak Einhorn, the Einhorn family, and Intis' former royal family, the Sauron family, are both in control of the Hunter pathway, which is also the Red Priest pathway. It was two of the blood types which the evil spirit had designated as being capable of removing the seal. Together with the Medici family's descendants which had been destroyed at Bansi Harbor, the three factions which held control over the Red Priest pathway are involved. Bansi Harbor was destroyed, causing the Medici family's Beyonder characteristic to use some magical connection to contact the evil spirit who's suspected to be Red Angel. Hence, the members of the Einhorn and Sauron families were attracted? No, that's not realistic. If the Church of Storms didn't discover any Beyonder characteristics, they definitely would have noticed a problem in this. Another reason? The evil spirit is using another method to attract people from the Einhorn and Sauron families? What or who did it go through in order to do so? The number of people who know of the evil spirit's existence is only a handful, me, Miss Sharon, as well as. Amidst his racing thoughts, Klein suddenly thought of a possibility. It was Rafter Pound, the descendant of the Tudor family who had previously been possessed by the evil spirit. He had unknowingly become a slave of the evil spirit. He had secretly helped it spread the news. And the evil spirit had sought me and Miss Sharon's help to numb us into thinking that we are the only ones who can rescue it. For this, it didn't mind betraying its descendants. Klein was alarmed as he felt like he had been fooled by the evil spirit. The endless gray fog hung silently before a light scraping noise on the bronze table sounded. Klein changed his seating posture and began placing more weight on the details regarding the evil spirit. He was more and more convinced that Miss Sharon and himself had neglected the possibility of something happening to Rafter Pound. This is a Beyonder power of the Red Priest pathway, conspiracist? Furthermore, this is even closer to a common fraud. There's only the use of supernatural powers in the details. Therefore, even if I had arrived at the mysterious space above the gray fog, I would passively have my senses fooled. I would have only discovered the problem by proactively considering and analyzing the situation. If it wasn't for Mr. Azek, who knew of the evil spirit suspected to be the dead Red Angel Medici, I wouldn't have realized this problem. Nor would I have hired Miss Magician to seek out any abnormalities on William Street. After a few minutes of contemplation, Klein conjured a pen and paper, preparing to use divination to confirm his theories. After deliberating for a moment, he finally penned the sentence for the dream divination, Baronet Rafter Pound's current situation. After putting down his dark red fountain pen, Klein held the piece of paper with the divination statement and leaned back in his chair. He first recalled the information he had regarding Rafter Pound before closing his eyes, chanting silently, and entering cogitation. Klein's thoughts rapidly calmed down as he quickly entered a dream state. In a gray world, disconnected scenes flashed past before finally fixating on Unit 29 on Civilau Street. Inside the warm activity room, Rafter Pound was dressed in cotton pajamas, holding a wine cup with red liquid. He was standing silently by the window, looking at the Backland police station headquarters diagonally across the street. This baronet had gray sideburns and puffy eye sockets that were tainted with blackish-green colors. The wrinkles on his forehead and the corners of his eyes and mouth were so pronounced that it exceeded what someone in his 40s should look like. His pupils weren't dilated in a very serious manner, but they were abnormal. His cheeks were flushed red as he had a furtive smile. He looked slightly abnormal compared to the last time Klein met him. Indeed, something is wrong with him. Klein left the dream and began considering how he could deal with the evil spirit. Without a doubt, he had his usual train of thought for such matters. Under the situation where he was unable to contact Miss Sharon, his first reaction was to report the matter. But how should it be reported? Klein considered it seriously and conjured the world's figure and made him pray. Through a reliable channel, pass this information to the Church of the Evernight Goddess and the Church of the God of Steam and Machinery. The information is, high-level spies from Fasak and Intis are gathered at William Street for unknown motives. Reward of £100. This was the explanation Klein thought of after repeated consideration. Directly revealing the King of Angels, Red Priest, the Medici family, or the Tudor dynasty's ruin would indeed garner the attention of the churches and military, but it would also easily make Miss Magician, who reported the matter, to be targeted by the official organizations. There were huge risks involved. Not only was using high-level spies from Fasak and Intis are gathered at William Street relatively milder, something which ordinary Beyonders had a chance of noticing, but it was also something that would make the churches and the military wary. They would send out the corresponding experts to employ the most effective methods. As for the subsequent fruits of the investigations, it was all thanks to their contributions and had nothing to do with the reporting party. Klein had considered getting Mr. Azek to help, but he ultimately chose to abandon the thought. This was because the evil spirit was suspected to be a king of angels and was very dangerous. Mr. Azek, who was still in the stage of recovering, might not be able to deal with it. After some thought, Klein turned the conjured scene into a stream of light and transmitted it to the crimson star representing the magician. Backland, Cherwood Borough. When Furs received the response from Mr. World, she was taken aback. "Those are high-level spies from Fasak and Intes?" she exclaimed to herself, believing that there was no way she could have inferred something like that with the information she had provided. However, she quickly felt at ease, believing that the reason why Mr. World had suspicions of abnormalities in William Street was precisely because he had received the corresponding intel of high-level spies. Once he confirmed the appearances of people from Fasak and Intes, it was easy for him to make such a conclusion. Pass this information to the Church of Evernight and the Church of Steam? Isn't that a euphemistic way of saying report? Unfortunately, I won't be able to watch from the sideline, or I'm sure a great show would unfold. Furs wasn't a stranger to reporting matters. After all, her housemate and good friend was a bounty hunter. She quickly had an idea, deciding to hand the matter of reporting the intel to the experienced Zio. When she came out of the bedroom, she saw Zio sitting on a sofa. She was flipping through documents about her target, raising her hand to grab at her messy blonde hair from time to time and appearing extremely serious. Furs casually picked up an item to embellish her motives and came over to the sofa. She handed over the item. "Here, have a piece of cake." Zio glanced at the cake slathered with a layer of cream. Without losing focus, she raised her hand to grab it. At this moment, Furs flipped her wrist, and the cake in her palm had turned into a golden decorative flower. Surprised, she asked with a smile. Zio couldn't help but roll her eyes. "Stop your performance. I prefer food." "All right. I have a matter for you to do." 70 pounds. Furs smiled as she sat down. After first dealing with the evil spirits matter, Klein returned to the real world and held a ritual in passing. He brought the radio transceiver, which had been placed above the gray fog for several days, back to his first-class master bedroom. Find authorized novels and web novel faster updates. Better experience, please click www.novelhall.com for visiting. He lay in bed and used cogitation to recover his energy until he was awoken by the tapping sounds. When Klein opened his eyes, the crimson moonlight had already shone in, blanketing the dim room like a veil, as well as the radio transceiver which was automatically spewing out illusory white paper. This really feels like a horror film. A shame it's connected to a magic mirror without any moral integrity or bottom line. Klein sat up and walked over. He saw lines of Loanese on the illusory white paper. "Honorable existence above the spirit world, your loyal and humble servant, Aurora Reads, has arrived and would like to greet you. Do you have something you would like to test me on? Look at this, look. This is what I call smooth talking. This is what a professional is like." In that instant, Klein really wished to pull Darkwill into the room to witness the magic mirror's art of communication. "I clearly have questions to ask it, but it becomes a situation of me testing it." And it even threw in a question. Klein controlled the curling of his mouth as he replied in a deep voice, "Yes. Please speak. The ignorant and limited Aurora is ready." Amidst the tapping sounds, the illusory paper no longer produced Loanese, but instead produced a fawning smiley face. This is already the emergence of emoticons. This fellow evolves really quickly. Klein directly asked, "Where can I obtain a mystical item which can steal the beyonder powers of others?" The tapping sounds suddenly became intense as the illusory white paper quickly produced scenes like a screenshot from a movie. There were places which Klein was familiar with, such as Tingen City's St. Selena Cathedral's Cheney's Gate, the black-haired, green-eyed, handsome poet, Leonard Mitchell, a middle-aged man who sat on a sofa smiling at the noble ladies opposite him, and a young arrogant lady who was loitering in the sewers. There were a total of 12 scenes, and finally a line of Loanese text appeared. "These are the ones that you can easily or conveniently acquire one from. There are a lot more, but they are either very complicated or troublesome, or they range at the highest levels which I cannot see clearly. Not bad. He actually knows to help me filter. This is a fantasy and mystical version of Google. Klein gently nodded and said, despite knowing the answer, it's your turn to ask. You have already answered. Amidst the tapping, Arora's unsurprising answer appeared on the illusory white paper. Klein chuckled inwardly and asked, where will Leonard Mitchell be staying for the time being? The tapping sounds became intense again as one scene after another appeared before Klein's eyes. It was a famous landmark in Backland, a towering Gothic bell tower with a bell of order hanging above. There was a road sign on the road with the words Pinster Street. It was Unit 7 along a row of terrace houses. In it, there was the extremely suave Leonard Mitchell wearing a black coat and red gloves. He was Klein's poet friend who was reading through the dossiers of Leonard and Capim. This fellow is in Backland, and he's investigating the Leonard and Capim cases? What the hell? The corners of Klein's mouth twitched slightly as he carefully thought of the clues he left behind in those two cases. The only clue is that Detective Sherlock Moriarty is involved in the two cases. If Leonard enters Daisy's dream, he should discover this point. But, I already kept a beard and had a pretty good disguise back then. It's unlikely that he can recognize me in the rather blurry scene in the dream and portraits. As long as he doesn't recognize me, it doesn't matter. What does problems with Sherlock Moriarty have to do with me, Gehrman Sparrow? Klein retracted his thoughts and memorized Leonard Mitchell's current residence. 7, Pinster Street, Backland. He planned on entrusting the Moon Emlyn White to visit Leonard Mitchell the day after tomorrow and use the badge of the Hermits of Fate to purchase a mystical item. I hope my dear poet friend has additional items to spare. If not, the price will definitely be at a premium. Klein tersely answered and said to the radio transceiver, it's your turn to ask. He was honestly curious as to what Arora's would ask this time. Amidst the clacking sounds, the radio transceiver spewed out new illusory paper. On it was a question composed in Loanese, Great Master, Leonard Mitchell has a huge secret. Do you wish to know? This can also be considered a question? Klein raised his head in amusement and surprise as he looked at the crimson moon which was silently illuminating the dark sea. Soon, he honestly gave an answer. Yes. Amidst the clacking sounds, the radio transceiver spewed out a brand new piece of illusory white paper under the crimson moonlight in the dim environment. Inside Leonard Mitchell resides an angel from the Zoroast family. He once changed my question. Angel? There's an angel residing in Leonard's body? An angel from the fourth epic Zoroast family? Although Klein was mentally prepared to hear an incredible secret, he was still shocked by what Arora's divulged. He was deeply concerned and surprised as well. An angel referred to Beyonders at sequence 1 or 2, making them rather close to the state of a true god. They had all sorts of mystical characteristics, and they could even influence low-sequence Beyonders at the same pathway to a certain extent and range. They were mighty figures who stood at the pinnacle of the real world. In the various churches, only their popes, pontiffs, chief shepherds, as well as certain legendary ascetics were grounded angels. Therefore, Klein believed that being latched onto by a parasite of this level wasn't a good thing. In the Dark Second Epic, the angels all had their divine names, and they were subsidiaries to the ancient gods. I haven't indirectly or directly interacted with many angels, Blasphemer Amon, Calamity Queen Kohainem, the evil spirit suspected to be Red Angel Medici, Tail Devourer Ouroboros as described by Little Sun, Miracle Invoker Zeradol from Roselle's Diaries, Son of the Creator, Adam, Hermes who cannot be confirmed if he's an angel or not, Snake of Fate, Will-Septon, who's still inside his mother's womb. Apart from the last two, the others appear to be very evil. Even the words they leave behind might make the reader go crazy or lose control. Would my dear poet ultimately end up as a sacrificial item of this angel parasite? This can explain why he thinks of himself as the protagonist of a play, the special one, and he was willing to help me hide my secret. The Zoroast family is in control of the Marauder pathway, which is the pathway that can steal the Beyonder powers of others. That's why Leonard was able to find and participate in the gathering of the Hermits of Fate. It's no wonder he offered to use Blood Vessel Thief, it's because he has a 4 visiting. Leonard's eyes focused as he asked in a deep voice, "Who are you?" At this moment, Emlyn didn't immediately answer. Instead, he surveyed his surroundings and clicked his tongue with a smile. Impressive. I nearly failed to realize that I had been pulled into a dream. He wasn't in a rush to leave as he took out the small badge he received from the world in front of Leonard Mitchell's solemn expression. Leonard took a glance as his expression eased slightly. He cocked his head slightly and paused for a few seconds. Silently, Emlyn White saw the scene around him rapidly shatter and vanish like shattering glass. Leonard sneered and pointed inside the house. Let's talk inside. Grandpa is a common trope in Chinese web novels where a powerful entity resides in the protagonist, giving him knowledge to one-up others. A well-known one is Grandpa Doring from Coiling Dragon. Upon hearing Leonard Mitchell's invitation, Emlyn didn't show any fear. He held his top hat and wore a subtle smile before entering the house without any qualms. He didn't take off his coat, as a potions professor often brought several supplementary items. It wouldn't look pleasant once the concealment of these items was gone. Emlyn sat down with his starched tailcoat, leaning back into the support as he leisurely said, "Actually, there's no need to go through the trouble. If you have it, name the price, otherwise, just frankly say so. Of course, I'm very certain you have one." He chuckled as his bright red eyes reflected Leonard Mitchell's figure that didn't mind the tidiness of his getup. "The feeling of me knowing you have a secret, with you not knowing anything about me, left Emlyn extremely pleased as he felt a strong sense of superiority. Leonard used his fingers to comb his raven-black hair and casually sat on the chair opposite Emlyn. He didn't show any panic or puzzlement as he said with a smile, "At the very least, I need to know who wants it. Perhaps it's me, or perhaps it's my friend." Emlyn tipped his chin as he smiled gently. Leonard squinted his eyes as he cocked his head, as though in thought. Finally, he laughed. "Alright, since you've already taken out that badge, I'll answer you frankly. I do have a mystical item that can be used to steal the beyonder powers of others, but I only have that one item. If you wish to buy it, 7,000 pounds. No negotiation." 7,000 pounds? A mystical item of this kind is that expensive? Although he didn't have to pay for it, Emlyn was still shocked. He nearly failed to maintain his bearing as a sanguine. He automatically converted how much money that could be used to exchange for dolls and doll dresses. After 2 seconds of thought, Emlyn revealed a smile and said, "I'll consider it. I'll answer you in 2 days." "Sure." Leonard curled the corners of his lips. After leaving 7 Pinster Street, Emlyn hired a rental carriage as though nothing had happened as he headed for the steam metro station in Northborough, before heading back to the bridge at Southborough. Taking off his hat, he looked back at the street which had carriages and pedestrians passing through. Emlyn chuckled and took a step into the Harvest Church. In between a tree and a black street lamp, an inconspicuous shadow suddenly moved, revealing the black-haired, green-eyed Leonard Mitchell. His appearance was silent, but it didn't garner the attention of any pedestrians. "Someone from the Church of Earth Mother?" Leonard frowned slightly as he muttered to himself. He paused for 2 seconds before leaving Rose Street where the Harvest Church was situated. 7,000 pounds? Why doesn't he just go rob a bank? Above the grey fog, Klein, who had received the feedback from Emlyn, nearly blurted out. As Gehrman Sparrow, he had previously said something similar, but the two situations and the mood was completely different. Using the bounty of the Golden Dream's third mate, Flowery Bowtie Jodson, as a reference, Klein inferred that a similar mystical item was worth about 5,000 pounds. Even if there was a premium, it would have maxed out at 6,000 pounds. Who knew that Leonard Mitchell would directly ask for 7,000 pounds? Could it be an item left behind from a high-sequence Beyonder, making the act of stealing Beyonder powers just one of its effects? No, if that's really the case, the price would start from 10,000 pounds. My dear poet, why didn't I know you as a profiteering merchant? You clearly exhibit a free and easy demeanor and showed no interest in money. Klein couldn't help but sigh. Since he had a clue and saw a glimmer of hope and how it was something that could be resolved with money, Klein didn't wish to seek out other channels to prevent any mishaps from happening. He quickly calculated his wealth and discovered that it was an acceptable price. Including the £300 advance from the apothecary, the £5,400 bounty from Wormtongue, and the cash I got from the bodies, and subtracting the £200 to be paid to Miss Magician, I have a total of £12,767 in cash and 5 gold coins. This isn't including my 3 soldi and 8 pence in change. Find authorized novels and web novel faster updates. Better experience, please click www.novelhall.com for visiting. In addition, Miss Justice will pay the £2,000 she owes me before the end of the week, as well as the £1,800 for the psychiatrist characteristic. I'm actually richer than I thought I was. Even in Backland, I can be considered a tycoon. Klein inhaled and didn't hesitate any further. He made the cash fly out from the junk pile and land on the table. He carefully counted £7,500 in cash and placed them aside, £7,000 for the mystical item, and £500 for Emlyn's hazardous pay. Sigh, after going through all the effort to go past 10,000, more than half of it will be gone in an instant. Klein conjured the world and made him pose in a praying manner to inform Emlyn that there were no problems with going through with the transaction. 15 minutes later, a ritual was to be held to receive the bestowment from Mr. Fool. In addition, Klein also made the world warn Emlyn to not be in a rush to complete the deal after getting the cash. He had to wait until tomorrow. This was because he was afraid that the angel from the Zoroast family inside Leonard Mitchell would sense the grey fog's aura on the cash. He wanted an airing process, just like back when he gave Emlyn the badge. 15 minutes later, Klein glanced at the cash pile which had shrunk by more than half and sighed before returning to the real world. It was already 10:40 on a Friday. They were about 8 hours from Orvie Island. It's time to intimidate the die of probability again. Klein muttered, held the ritual, and brought out the iron cigar case which contained the all-black eye. He guessed that Darkwill would suspect something, so he deliberately brought the die to the washroom to deal with it. Seeing the die of probability calm down once again, Klein quickly dealt with the all-black eye and the iron cigar case. After heaving a long sigh of relief, he did a silent count of the time. It should be enough to last until Darkwill hands it to the contact. There's no need to deal with it again. With this in mind, Klein began to consider another problem with a certain degree of concern. The all-black eye has appeared in front of the true creator before, and it has his mental corruption. To take it out once every few hours might cause him to lock onto me, allowing him to send powerhouses to seek me out. However, it was only 1 or 2 minutes each time, so the problem isn't that serious. Even if he senses it, their estimate of the area wouldn't be too precise. Sigh, when it involves the true creator, there's no way to determine things with divination. I can only raise my guard. Thankfully, this is the last time, and it will take only about 8 hours to reach our destination. Why am I raising flags for myself? Pooey. 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 I wasn't thinking of anything. Klein picked up the die of probability and returned to the living room and saw the chubby apothecary slumped on the reclining chair, looking completely exhausted. As for the owl, Harry, it looked like it was brimming with energy, as though it didn't need any rest. These are the different traits that different creatures gain from taking the same potion? At the very least, Miss Justice has never mentioned that she doesn't need sleep. It's a uniqueness that comes about because of an owl's biological makeup? Sigh, I don't know much about owls. Indeed, I'm just a keyboard warrior who is only a jack of all trades. Klein sat on the sofa and placed the milky white die into the ring box and patiently waited for evening to arrive when the ship was scheduled to dock. Time ticked by as the sun gradually set in the west. At this point in time, Klein, who had his eyes closed, suddenly sat up, having sensed an extreme danger befall the area. It had exceeded a seer's spiritual intuition and the clown's intuition for danger. It seemed to stem from the formless grey fog which strangely rippled around him. An enemy. Tail Devourer Ouroboros or the Aurora Order Saint? Klein opened his eyes as he began considering countermeasures with an abnormally serious expression. Any mistake in a time such as this would require him to consider matters of being resurrected. As for Darkwill and Harry, there was absolutely no way for them to be spared. In the beginning, he hoped that the visitor could only vaguely sense a general area and might not find him or the die of probability. However, when he considered how he was on a ship with no one around on the sea, it wasn't too hard to lock onto a target. The problems would only become worse when that happened, with giving up being the only choice. Above the liner, space was suddenly torn open as an invisible door filled with complicated symbols appeared. Two pale hands reached out from the door and suddenly pulled backwards, allowing his entire body to walk out. He wore a black bonnet and a classic dark robe, a favorite among elders. However, he didn't look past 40. His brown hair was slightly curled, which seemed abnormally hard. Countless illusory images darted across his dark eyes, as though layers after layer of chaotic worlds were hidden within. As Klein's sense of danger intensified, just the change in his expression frightened Darkwill and Harry enough for them to freeze. He didn't hesitate as he followed the plans he had made for such situations. He leaned forward and picked up the die of probability. Determine the outcome of the malefic visitor who just arrived. I want 1 point. Klein said in a deep and soft voice, and he threw out the milky white die. He subconsciously prayed to the goddess, hoping that the die which had recently been intimidated was obedient enough and played a meaningful role. Meanwhile, he appeared extremely calm, to prevent the die from sensing his anxiety and take the opportunity to cause trouble. As the die of probability rolled several times while producing clinking sounds, it fixed at the blood-red 1 point. Above the liner, the black-robed man, who didn't look 40, had the entire liner reflected within his eyes. He emanated his spirituality and scanned the surroundings. He extended his hand to grab the space in front of him as he suddenly pulled a nearly invisible door. The powerhouse stepped in and vanished from the spot. Inside the first-class cabin, Klein immediately felt the danger distancing itself from him. He couldn't help but heave a sigh of relief. He looked at the die of probability on the coffee table and couldn't help but sigh inwardly. If this die didn't have such a negative side effect and could be utilized to its full extent, it would be a divine artifact. As expected of a Grade 0 sealed artifact. As expected of the uniqueness of the monster pathway. Only at this point in time did Darkwill find his courage again as he carefully asked, what just happened? Klein maintained his posture and calmly replied, there's no need for you to know. I understand. The more I know, the greater the danger I'll be in. Darkwill wiped the cold sweat from his face. There weren't any more accidents in the next few hours. After the sun went below the horizon and the sky became completely dark, Klein finally saw a towering lighthouse appear not too far away. Orvie was situated northeast of the Rorstad archipelago. The straight-line distance wasn't too great, but the safe sea route had required ships to take many twists and turns, causing the distance traveled to increase by several hundred nautical miles. It was originally a primitive island that harbored many kinds of beyonder creatures without any humans inhabiting it. After the hunting era came to an end, the Lone Kingdom banished certain criminals there, causing Orvie Island to gradually have villagers and towns. When more eastern islands were discovered and colonized, the area attracted many new immigrants due to the convenience of the sea route and its rich natural resources, making it a rather thriving port city. The light from the lighthouse tower appeared so warm in the dark environment as it led liners towards the harbor for them to dock. We've finally arrived. My gratitude to the Crimson Moon and Fate for blessing me. Darkwill jumped off the last gangway and stepped onto solid cemented ground. To be precise, apart from Fate, you should thank the Fool and see God for their blessings. Klein held his leather suitcase with one hand as he tapped his cane. Darkwill properly put away the ring box which contained the die of probability, and he didn't delay in asking where the bellman, Carnot, stayed. He rented a carriage and went straight for St. Draco Cathedral. He then entered the magnificent bell tower which boldly used the colors of red, blue, and yellow. Inside the bell tower, Carnot had a cramped room he could call his own. Knock. 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 Darkwill knocked on the door thrice, eager to hand over the item on his person. With a creak, the brown wooden door opened and out came a large man who was slightly hunched. He looked to be in his 40s, and individually, there was nothing strange about his facial features, but when put together, it was filled with an unharmonious vibe. Klein only took a glance and discovered that his eyes weren't leveled. His nostrils were of different sizes, and his left facial muscles were slightly loose, causing the corner of his mouth to droop slightly. It was the complete opposite for the right side of his face. Find authorized novels and webnovel faster updates. Better experience, please click www.novelhall.com for visiting. Carnot's legs were obviously of different lengths, and one of his arms was thick, while the other was thin. His entire body was highly disproportional, making him extremely ugly. "Who are you?" Dressed in a black robe, Carnot glanced at the duo. "Are you the bellman, Carnot?" Darkwill asked cautiously. Carnot chuckled with one corner of his mouth raised while the other stayed low. "There shouldn't be a second person as ugly as me." "Indeed." Darkwill nodded very honestly before laughing. "I can tell that you have quite a good state of mind. To be honest, looks don't matter for a man. What's important is their skills in bed." "TSK, that's because you haven't seen ladies who only have fetishes for good looks." Having experienced the era of celebrities of the masses, Klein scoffed from the side. Carnot's expression darkened as he said, "I don't wish to discuss such matters." "You have problems in that area?" "No problem. I have different kinds of medicine that can treat all your problems." Before Darkwill finished his sentence, Klein took a step forward, afraid that he would end up being beaten to death. He put half his body between them as he said in a deep voice, "He's Roy King's student." "I figured. Roy King once described his traits." Carnot made way and invited the two in. His room was extremely tiny, with only a single bed and a cabinet which could be used as a dining table. The washroom was at the bottom of the bell tower. Darkwill pulled out a ring box and handed it to Carnot as he forced a smile. "My teacher got me to hand this item to you." Carnot stole a glance at it and was clearly relieved to see 4 points. He said to Darkwill, "You aren't as unreliable as your teacher described you to be. I can tell that you didn't attempt to use it. That would have awoken it and make it realize that it's no longer sealed." The chubby apothecary's face blushed red as he honestly said, "That's because it's relatively quiet now. In another 1 to 2 hours, it will automatically roll itself. It's best you think of a method to seal it again." Carnot's face twitched. "Again?" "Well, I accidentally dropped it on the ground and then it came alive." Darkwill wanted to glance at his owl, Harry, but he realized that it hadn't followed him in. It was perched outside the bell tower to serve as a sentry. Carnot's eyes clearly widened as his hunched back nearly straightened. "How did you arrive here?" From his point of view, Roy King's student should have long died at the whims of the die. Darkwill hurriedly pointed to Gehrman Sparrow and said, "It's all thanks to this gentleman. He's a powerful adventurer. He provided the most effective protection and a temporary method of sealing the die." "What method was it?" Carnot blurted out the question. Klein laughed and replied, "Trade secret." Carnot's expression changed a few times as he pressed his hand to his chest and bowed. "I thank you for your help on behalf of my organization." Darkwill continued, "Hiring him costs £1,000 and a request. The request is to help him find a mystical item with powerful offensive traits but without very serious negative side effects. He will purchase it at a reasonable price." I only had about £300, so that was all I could pay. I'll have to rely on you to pay the rest." Carnot fell silent as the corners of his lips twitched. "I only have about £100. Suddenly, there was silence in the bellman's room. The wind from outside blew through the cracks and brushed across the 3 men's face. Finally, Carnot spoke again. "Perhaps Councilor Ricardo has the money. I'll lead you to him. From the looks of it, he trusts us. After all, a Fate Councilor is in no way comparable to a die of probability. If there were really problems with us, there would be no need for us to bring the die over to prevent any accidents and snatch away the uniqueness." Klein watched as Carnot picked up a lantern from the corner of the room. At this moment, he secret activated his spirit vision and simply scanned the man. Klein nearly pricked up his brows with the sight. This was because Carnot's aura colors were rather unique. There were no problems with his emotional colors, as they were very ordinary. However, his ether body, which represented his body, appeared unnatural. His heart was green, his head was purple, and his digestive system was yellow. It felt like they were different parts which were mashed together in great disharmony. At the same time, Carnot's soul also gave the same feeling. A monster that was stitched up internally? Klein made a rough judgment based on what he knew. After Carnot got the lantern, he turned his head to glance at the adventurer, Gehrman Sparrow, and said without much of an expression, "I'm very sensitive to spirit vision. I believe you have noticed certain problems. I'm not a naturally born person. I'm a product of the Church of Earth Mother's attempts to refine the human body. I'm considered a failed specimen, which is why I do not have the ability in that aspect." His final sentence was directed at Dark Will. Carnot didn't speak again as he carried the lantern and donned a black robe. He hunched his huge body and used the dim light to walk down the stairs of the dark and silent bell tower. Product of the Church of Earth Mother's attempts to refine the human body? But St. Draco Cathedral belongs to the Church of Storms. Since it's a failed specimen, no attention is paid to it. Carnot turned his back on the Church of Earth Mother and became a member of the Life School of Thought. This is understandable. Both the Church of Earth Mother and the Life School of Thought hold the apothecary pathway, and they will definitely have some overlapping. But why would the Life School of Thought send this fellow, that doesn't seem simple to be a bellman, to the Church of Storms? Is it just a normal disguise, or there's a particular connection between the two? Klein followed Carnot in a seemingly calm manner as he walked out the bell tower and circled round to a stone bridge. Just as he came close to the left side of the bridge, Klein suddenly felt something as he looked diagonally upwards. The owl, Harry, had flown out as well and landed on a tree branch. Gotcha! The branch suddenly snapped as Harry plummeted. With great difficulty did it fly up again without falling to the ground. Darkwill was just about to say something when Carnot explained in a deep voice, "Councillor Ricardo is injured, so his powers are somewhat out of control. Once anyone enters a specific range, they will be tainted with bad luck." Carnot stopped in his footsteps as he threw the ring box containing the die under the bridge. "Mr. Councillor, Roy King's student has delivered the die." "Very good." A hoarse voice sounded from deep within the bridge's belly. A silver-scaled palm reached out from the darkness as he held down the ring box which had fallen onto the mud. Following that, he opened the ring box and took out the milky white die. His other hand, which was covered in silver scales, also reached out as he held a piece of a paper-like item made of leather. The item resembled a water pipe, but its ends were connected. It revealed a grayish-white color under the crimson moonlight. Its surface had many complicated symbols and labels, as well as many words in Hermes text which pointed to the snake of Mercury, Wuxia. Fate Councilor Ricardo pulled the item apart and stuffed the die of probability into it before connecting the two ends together. Using fate at a small scale to seal the die of probability with periodic boundary conditions, making it remain in a perpetual state of slumber or calm? Indeed, Snake of Mercury Wuxia had foreseen such a situation and had made certain preparations. Klein retracted his gaze in relief, and he heard Ricardo's hoarse voice. "I already know of your agreement, Mr. Gehrman Sparrow. I will help you find the mystical item after I've recovered. As for the 700 pounds, I'll immediately augment you with good luck. Go to the few casinos in Orvie and make some bets and you'll receive the corresponding reward. Remember, do not win more than 200 pounds at each casino. You must not win more than 700 pounds in total. Which is to say that you don't have the money either. Seeing how you're hiding while injured, it's considered normal not to have money with you." Klein nodded indiscernibly and said, "Okay." He waited for about 10 seconds without sensing anything. Councilor Ricardo heaved a sigh of relief and said, "You have become sufficiently lucky." "Is that so?" Klein chose to believe him and didn't disturb Darkwill's report to a senior of how his teacher had been imprisoned. Based on Carnot's introduction, he found a nearby casino and sat at the blackjack table. After about 10 minutes, he walked out of the casino with a blank look. Not only did he not win money, but he had lost a total of 30 pounds. What happened to the good luck? Why did I believe him? That darn old man is terrible. Klein didn't hesitate to return to the stone bridge and approached its belly. That fast? You have pretty good luck. Ricardo laughed as he coughed under the dark bridge. At that moment, Dark Will and Harry had already found a nearby inn to live in. Klein replied without a change in expression, I lost. Lost? Ricardo ruminated over the word and couldn't formulate a sentence for quite a long period of time. In the dark environment, an ordinary owl nervously flew over. The two street lamps on either side of the stone bridge silently illuminated the street, but they were unable to disperse the darkness beneath. Only the crimson moonlight from high above could barely illuminate the brown soil. Hidden under the bridge, Fate Councilor Ricardo remained silent for quite a while, making Klein suspect whether he had already passed away due to his heavy injuries. He guessed that a large reason as to why the luck augmentation had failed was because of this. Just as Klein was about to ask a probing question to determine the situation, Ricardo coughed and said in a deep, hoarse voice, You live up to the reputation of being a powerful adventurer capable of temporarily sealing the die. What happened has exceeded my expectations. Ahem, I'm very curious as to why my luck augmentation on you had failed. I'm very regretful that I can't come out and meet you in person. Otherwise, I should be able to see what Beyonders from other pathways will find difficult to see, even if they possess relatively powerful spirit visions. This is the uniqueness that the Fate pathway holds. So the problem lies with me? That's not the point. The point is that you need to reimburse me 700 pounds, no, 730 pounds. Klein cursed as he couldn't help but recall the orphan, Adamasal, who had the nickname of Monster in Tingen City. The young man who was equal to half a sequence 9 had cried out after seeing Klein before falling to the ground. His eyes bled, and the fear he exhibited was as if he had seen a devil. This is because of the uniqueness of the Wheel of Fortune's path of the divine, so he saw something wrong with me. He saw something related to the Grey Fog? Unfortunately, this Fate Councilor is quite heavily injured and has a domain of bad luck around him. There's no way for him to help inspect me. I should ask Snake of Fate will accept him when I'm back. Perhaps he might know something. However, this pathway does have the bearing of a charlatan. He might not directly answer me and has a high chance of answering in vague terms. Klein maintained his expressionless attitude and said, Then, what do you plan on doing? Ricardo sighed and said, Get Darkwill here. I'll augment him with good luck and get him to win the money at the casinos on your behalf. Using the name of the inn counselor Ricardo gave, Klein quickly found the chubby apothecary, Darkwill. Then, while carrying the suitcase and cane, Klein watched as he kept winning money at the major casinos. By midnight, he had already won 750 pounds. After receiving the remaining 730 pounds, Klein realized a problem. The reason for the luck augmentation's failure was because of him. Why is that so? Klein held close his bulging wallet and frowned as he thought silently to himself. He quickly thought of the thin, invisible grayish-white fog around him and realized the reason. After advancing to faceless, the gray fog has integrated with reality to a certain extent. Not only can it help me screen off ravings that aren't too powerful, but it can also destroy any influence that changes my fate to a certain extent. Therefore, this counselor's luck augmentation was ineffective? According to this logic, bad luck to a certain extent shouldn't affect me either. What the heck? It doesn't make me become some unlucky fool, but it also destroys my chance of being a lucky man or winner. Klein secretly shook his head and followed Darkwill and the owl back to the stone bridge. He informed Ricardo of how to summon his messenger and to immediately send him news once he obtained any information on a mystical item with powerful offensive traits. After doing all of this, Klein found an inn at the Orvi Island's port city and got a simple room for himself. Find authorized novels and web novel faster updates. Better experience, please click www.novelhall.com for visiting. Backland. In the morning, Emlyn White walked under his favorite gloomy skies, moving through the thick fog that couldn't be compared to those in November or December as he once again arrived outside Northborough's 7, Pinster Street. After pulling the doorbell, he straightened his back as he lifted his chin and waited patiently. When Leonard opened the door, he looked at the handsome but detestable face before making way and allowing the visitor to enter. He was still dressed in his home wear, comprising of a white shirt and black trousers. However, he had an additional dark-colored vest draped over him. "Have you considered the matter?" Leonard asked with a smile. "No problem." Since it wasn't his money, Emlyn had no intention to haggle. He even believed that with the attitude displayed by Leonard, there was a high chance of having the price raised if he tried. Leonard gently nodded and smiled. "Very rich. I can tell that you're trying to lead me to say more." Emlyn silently scoffed and replied, "That's not something you need to concern yourself with." With that said, he raised the suitcase in his hand and opened it, revealing £7,000 in cash. Leonard took out each stack of cash and thoroughly checked it carefully. Then, he pulled off the red glove he wore on his left hand and handed it to Emlyn. "This is the mystical item you require. It can change colors to disguise itself. It's called Tinder. It can raise the wearer's charm, making his words be equipped with great persuasiveness. It can steal the beyonder power of a target within 50 meters. The more you understand the target, the easier it is to steal the power you wish to steal. The less you know, the more random it becomes, and it relies on luck. When the target is at sequence 6, there is a chance of failure. The higher the sequence, the higher the chance of failure. After the theft succeeds, the target will lose that beyonder power, and it will take at least 12 hours to recover. The owner of Tinder will be able to use it adeptly for 10 minutes. And the reason why it's expensive is because it has very few negative side effects." Emlyn, who silently took in the introduction, had his interest piqued by a mystical item like Tinder. He asked, "What are its negative side effects?" Leonard combed his hair and smiled. "First, when wearing it, there is a small probability of losing something on you. Second, when using it, a particular beyonder power belonging to you will be lost for at least 12 hours, but during this period, it will be the only beyonder power lost. In other words, even if it's used repeatedly, there will only be one power lost the entire time. Compared to the many sealed artifacts I know of, its negative side effects are indeed trivial." Emlyn cleared his throat as he nodded. He received Tinder and checked it carefully before taking out the stacks of cash from the suitcase and placing them on the coffee table. Following that, he placed the glove into the suitcase and didn't take it with him directly. With the suitcase, Emlyn returned to the Harvest Church just like he did before. Once he entered the priest's break room, he set up a sacrifice ritual. The illusory and mysterious door opened as the red glove tore through the dark and deep void as it was sent directly above the gray fog. At the moment the gray fog made contact with the glove, a tiny, distorted, terrifying face suddenly appeared. It kept evaporating as it struggled to sustain itself. Upon seeing this scene, Klein wasn't surprised. After all, the grandpa residing in Leonard's body was an angel of the Marauder pathway. If Amon could do it, it was quite certain that he was capable of doing the same. For this, he had made sufficient preparations. He believed that even if the grandpa had really reached Amon's level, he was able to wipe out the corresponding aura without making him sense the existence of the gray fog, making him take action on Emlyn. Picking up the sea god scepter, which had long been placed in front of him, Klein made the blue gems light up at the same time from a commanding position. Suddenly, silver light bloomed above the gray fog as the lightning carried portions of the gray fog's powers like a storm, zapping the tiny illusory face. The face dissipated completely before it could even cry out, leaving behind a dead translucent worm with 12 transparent rings. "Worm of time, but it seems weaker than Amon," Klein muttered as he beckoned with his hand for the red glove and familiar worm to fly to him. After some serious scrutiny, he confirmed that the worm was basically identical to the one Amon's avatar had left behind. "My dear poet's grandpa is of the same sequence as Amon?" "Sequence 1? No, not necessarily. Perhaps this is a unique trait of one of the earlier sequences. If it's really a sequence one, the notion that Amon is the son of the creator and a king of angels makes it possible that he has fused with the uniqueness or has another sequence one characteristic. Klein made a guess, but he was unable to verify it. As for what the dead worm of time could be used for, or when its spirituality would completely dissipate, he could only throw it into the junk pile due to his lack of the corresponding knowledge. 7. Pinster Street, Backlund. Leonard Mitchell sat on the sofa with his eyes tightly closed. His legs were propped up on the coffee table as though he was using a short nap to make up for an entire night of being awake. After an unknown period of time, he suddenly opened his eyes and said with a suppressed voice, "What happened? Have you determined the true buyer of Tinder?" An elderly voice rang out in his mind. "The aura I left behind has been eliminated, completely eliminated." "Did you discover anything?" Leonard retracted his feet as he asked in a deep voice. The ancient voice sighed. "Nothing. Everything was over before I could react. If I were in my best state, I might have been able to grasp the relevant clues. Unfortunately, I've remained in a weak state for years." Leonard remained silent for more than 10 seconds before he shook his head. "Then we'll temporarily treat it as if this never happened." Above the gray fog, Klein listened to Emlyn's report and took note of the information regarding the mystical item. He fiddled with the glove named Tinder as he examined it. "Heh, this way, I'll have a glove for my right hand," he chuckled as he muttered to himself. After serious consideration, Klein abandoned the thought of immediately extracting the mental corruption of the true creator from the all-black eye. This was to ensure his success, hoping to leave the chance to the moment when he was concocting the Nimblewright Master Potion. According to the records of the City of Silver, even without the gray fog screening, there were no problems with such a procedure. Furthermore, with the gray fog, there wouldn't be any additional accidents, even if it were the mental corruption left behind by the true creator. "I can also use Tinder normally." "Yes, when I need to use it, I have to put my cash, pocket watch, and other mystical items above the gray fog. I mustn't let any item become lost. In fact, even if I don't do so, the problem isn't too great. I'm a seer. Do I need to be afraid of not being able to find things I dropped? Heh. In a normal battle, I'll have creeping hunger on my left hand and Tinder on my right. Just the thought of it sounds formidable." Klein reined in his thoughts and discovered that everything related to the Sequence 5 Nimblewright Master Potion was ready, apart from the 2 commonly seen supplementary ingredients. He nodded indiscernibly and muttered silently to himself, "I just need to wait for the faceless potion to be completely digested. Then, I'll board the ship of Admiral of Stars or the Hanged Man and head east of the Sonia Sea to find mermaids." Lone Kingdom, Eastchester County, Stone City. Having left the manor, Audrey moved into a villa. After she finished engaging in social gatherings with the local nobles, she sent her servant to the Varvat Bank to withdraw a sum of cash. She didn't need to worry about this any further. She could easily pay off the £2,000 she owed Mr. Fool's Blessed, and she could also pay the £1,800 she owed Mr. World for the psychiatrist characteristic. 15 minutes later, Audrey opened the room to her bedroom and glanced at her personal maidservant, Annie, who was monitoring the servants while they did their work. She looked down at the golden retriever who was sitting by the side of the wall and smiled. With a smile, she suppressed her voice and asked with shining eyes, "Susie, you'll receive a gift in a while. Are you looking forward to it?" If it were in the past, Audrey would have definitely said, "Susie, your present is here," making the golden retriever realize that she could find the actual item in the room as well. Otherwise, it was very easy for Susie, who had been studying the basics of mysticism, to guess that Audrey had used ritualistic magic. With this new sentence structure, the situation could have Audrey receive a mysterious letter or news in her bedroom to confirm that the gift was about to be delivered. There would be too many possibilities as a result of this. Susie could read the joy and sincere attitude deep inside Audrey's heart as she subconsciously opened her mouth, hoping to stir the air to produce a voice. She had wanted to inquire about the gift, but she sharply sensed that Audrey's personal maid, Annie, was approaching. The alert Susie abandoned her original thoughts. She returned to the state of being an ordinary dog as she slowly wagged her tail to express her joy and anticipation. After making an excuse to head out, Audrey entered a chemistry laboratory that she had specially marked out for herself. She placed the psychiatrist characteristic and supplementary ingredients on the table. "Susie, do you still remember the potion concocting process?" She cleared her throat and straightened her back as she excitedly played the role of a teacher. "Woof, I remember." Susie already knew what her present was. In her joy, she barked. Audrey added, "Try to concoct it by yourself." Susie looked down at her paws and suddenly fell silent. Audrey was taken aback before a brief silence ensued. A few seconds later, before the golden retriever could speak, Audrey covered her mouth without any atypical response and giggled. "All right, Susie, there's no need to say a word. I know what you wish to say. You wish to express the fact that you're only a dog and am unable to concoct the potion, right? How embarrassing." At the same time, Audrey, who wore a charming and graceful external bearing, facepalmed herself inwardly. "Woof." Susie nodded forcefully. Audrey took the opportunity and turned around. Soon, she finished concocting the psychiatrist potion. She had previously asked Susie and learned that she had already finished digesting the potion on Wednesday. That's less than 2 months. Yes, a large reason has to do with how Susie isn't being noticed. She can run about anywhere in the manor or villa and eavesdrop, allowing her to read the true thoughts of the maidservants. That's good as well. She will always share the tidbits with me. If not for her, I wouldn't have known of the dark sides of many people who appear normal and kind usually. Audrey poured the potion into a bowl and placed it on the floor. She watched as Susie went over and began licking the potion as she couldn't curb the anticipation in her heart. Susie might be influenced by the potion and become unstable. But it's all right. Psychiatrist Miss Audrey is already prepared to use placate at any moment. Yes, I prefer the name psychoanalysis. That sounds more professional. Audrey stared at Susie with her beautiful emerald-like eyes with great seriousness and discovered that Susie's pupils were gradually fading and turning vertical. Dark gold scales seemed to grow beneath her thick fur, and the spirituality that belonged to Susie kept radiating outwards as though it was interweaving with the entire villa's space. After calming her somewhat nervous emotions, Audrey scrutinized Susie's state. As long as something abnormal happened to Susie, she would immediately use the beyond her power, psychoanalysis. Suddenly, Susie's voice sounded out in her ears. "Audrey, I'm done." Audrey was temporarily at a loss on what to say. In her dream, Daisy returned to East Borough and to the old apartment she had lived in for years. She pushed open the door and saw her mother, Liz, and her sister, Freja, doing the laundry diligently. Daisy instantly became delighted and was just about to join them. She was in charge of ironing the laundry. At this moment, she heard knocking at the door. She turned her head and realized that the visitor was a young man in a black and white checkered police uniform. The officer had black hair and green eyes, with a somewhat blurry face. He held a notebook and fountain pen as he asked, "In the Capim case, apart from what you mentioned, is there anything else you didn't mention to us?" "It's all nothing important," Daisy answered in a rather groggy manner. The handsome officer looked down at his notebook and said, "It's fine. I'm willing to listen. Find authorized novels and web novel faster updates. Better experience, please click www.novelhall.com for visiting." Daisy looked back at the clothes which were hung up, feeling as though she had forgotten some instructions. She honestly described all sorts of trivialities. In the end, she said, "After I was abducted, my mother and sister had hired a private detective to search for me. His name is Mr. Sherlock Moriarty. He's a good man. Although he didn't find me directly, he later contacted a reporter to help me get compensated with the foundation money." The black-haired and green-eyed officer looked up again and glanced at Daisy before revealing a warm smile. "Very good. Your answer is very satisfactory. Do you still remember the private detective's appearance?" Daisy nodded. Without any alarm, she saw Mr. Sherlock Moriarty standing beside her. The detective had grown a thick beard and wore gold-rimmed glasses. It was almost identical to the one in her memories. After the black-haired, green-eyed officer sized up the image a few times, he seemed to vanish at some point in time without Daisy realizing it. For some reason, her mother and sister had also vanished. She ran through East Borough in search of the familiar figures, but she ultimately woke up from her depression and sorrow. When she saw the dark ceiling of her school dormitory, she lay there in a daze for seconds. Daisy didn't make a sound as she turned her body and buried half her face into the pillow. By the corners of the pillow, a wet stain gradually spread out. The person who had entered Daisy's dream was none other than Leonard Mitchell. Although his investigation of the commonalities of the two cases was to give him time to deal with matters of his own, he didn't forget to act in a perfunctory manner. In the end, he really discovered a problem. In the cases of Lenevis and Capim, a private detective named Sherlock Moriarty was involved, including his friend, reporter Mike Joseph. Although they had only appeared on the outskirts of this matter, it's also a direction for the investigation. That Sherlock Moriarty looks somewhat familiar. Which fugitive is he? Leonard recalled what he had seen in the dream as he wore his red glove and entered the basement of St. Samuel Cathedral. Just as he greeted the team captain, Soist, he saw a partner approach and hand him 2 thin sheets of paper. The information regarding the red-eyed man from the Harvest Church is all here. Thank you. Do you want to have lunch together? Leonard asked with a smile. The Nighthawk shrugged and said, no, as long as you stop making me have nightmares. Deal. Leonard smiled as he received the dossier. He stood there without being in a hurry to sit down as he casually browsed through it. Emlyn White. A vampire. Currently under the jurisdiction of the Church of Earth Mother. He once vanished for a period of time. His parents had hired private detectives to find him. Thanks to a particular Mr. Stewart, this matter was ultimately resolved by the famous detective, Sherlock Moriarty. Leonard's smile gradually froze as his expression turned serious. Sherlock Moriarty? He repeated this name in his mind. Klein wasn't in a rush to find an opportunity to engage in true acting. He toured Orvie Island's port city with the mindset of a tourist, finding a brief and rare moment of relaxation in his tense life. This city had mostly immigrants from Lone. The cuisine wasn't much different from the east coast of the kingdom, with the only difference being that there were rare fruits and all sorts of seafood here. It was also quite a unique trait of the city. This place was rich in natural resources and was located in a key location on the safe sea routes. The standard of living was pretty good. Even the farmers in the suburbs could save up some money through their fruit gardens. This didn't mean that Orvie didn't have poor people or the lower class. This class was mainly made up of people who were former slaves. Lone's parliament had long abolished slavery. After chewing a juicy and sweet fruit, Klein watched the sky turn dark. He took a turn at the corner of the street and entered a bar named Sweet Lemon. It was a famous gathering place for adventurers in Orvie. Klein planned on buying the 2 remaining supplementary ingredients of a Nimblewright Master, the relatively common Drago tree bark and Sonia Golden Spring water. At this moment, the bar was rather lively. There were many people holding up cups around the boxing ring as they cheered loudly. There were people who looked like adventurers at the surrounding tables. They were discussing all kinds of rumors in hushed tones. Just as Klein was squeezing towards the bar counter, he suddenly heard his name. I'm Gehrman Sparrow. You should know who I am. I received a treasure map and need to hire some helpers. It's not because I'm afraid, but it's because I can't carry that much treasure alone. A green-eyed man in his 30s held half a glass of liquor and spoke to 2 men and 2 women in the corner. It was a mystery if they were merchants or adventurers. You are also named Gehrman Sparrow? Treasure map, why does it sound like a scam? My killing of Wormtongue has already reached this place from Byam? Yes, it was likely communicated via a telegram or visitors. Therefore, many people know of my name and deeds but do not know what I look like. Cheats are using this opportunity to pass themselves off as me to cheat others. Klein moved over as he came to a realization. The green-eyed man drank a mouthful of liquor and slammed the glass onto the table. I don't mind whether you refuse or agree, but I hate it when people make me wait. Do you wish to be like Wormtongue? The young man opposite him said, slightly intimidated, I know you're a powerful adventurer. So? The green-eyed man cut off the man's words. At that moment, he felt his collar tighten as he was lifted up by someone and thrown out the door. Klein didn't provide an explanation as he directly threw the man out of the door with a stoic expression. Then, he drew his revolver and aimed it at the spot where the man had fallen to the ground. He pulled the trigger without any hesitation. Bang! Just as the green-eyed man fell to the ground, he saw a spark light up at the ground near his crotch. He was so frightened that he swallowed back his cursing and scrambled away. Without any explanation, his weak performance proved that he wasn't Gehrman Sparrow. Klein ignored the victim who stood there in a daze. He politely blew at the mouth of his revolver before stuffing it back into his underarm holster. Following that, he walked slowly to the bar counter in the resulting silent atmosphere. Klein sat in front of the bar counter and slammed his fist onto the counter. 1 glass of Southville beer. Behind him, a few bouncers hesitated about whether to come over to give him a warning or pretend that no one had fired a shot. The bartender signaled to the bouncers with his eyes as he picked up a glass and chuckled. Why don't you try a cup of sweet lemon? Our boss once went to Trier to learn cocktail mixing. He has mastered many of the cocktail recipes left behind by Emperor Roselle, and he has created the most popular sweet lemon in Orvie on his own. Klein wasn't moved as he calmly replied, I only drink beer. Find authorized novels and web novel faster updates. Better experience, please click www.novelhall.com for visiting. Alright, the bartender wasn't in a rush to get the bottle of Southville beer as he said with a smile, Sir, are you an adventurer? Klein nodded without saying an answer. The bartender didn't hesitate as he said with a smile, perhaps you should meet our boss. He's very friendly to new adventurers and is willing to treat them to drinks. Besides, there will be some aid offered to you. Klein, who had come with the intention of purchasing the supplementary ingredients of a Nimblewright master, didn't reject the offer. He took out a brass penny and flicked it before catching it firmly. He placed the penny on the bar counter as a tip to thank the bartender for the information before slowly standing up and walking to the second floor under the lead of a bouncer, where he entered a room at the other end of the corridor. The room was covered with thick, brownish-yellow, soft carpet. There was a faint smell of high-quality coal burning, mixed with the aroma of a cigar. A middle-aged man with his blonde hair combed neatly backwards was leaning on a reclining chair, sucking at his cigar as he read the papers. Surrounding him were 6 bodyguards. Although Klein wasn't a beyonder of the spectator domain, and he was unable to determine any unique traits or the strength of these bodyguards, nor was he from the mystery prior or monster pathway, he could see certain secrets. He could notice things others wouldn't be able to discover, but his spiritual intuition made him believe that these bodyguards were definitely beyonders who could threaten him to a certain extent. The middle-aged man put down the newspaper and pulled at the collars of his black shirt before slowly standing up. He extended his right hand and said, Welcome to Orvie, my adventurer friend. His blue eyes had a smile to them as he looked rather sincere. Klein extended his right palm and smacked palms with him without a word. He was waiting for the man to speak. The middle-aged man pointed to a sofa opposite the reclining chair and chuckled. I'm the boss here, Bilt Brando. I was once an adventurer with quite considerable strength. I've lived to this day and have earned quite a bit. He's very confident with his strength, thus, daring to directly say it. Klein didn't stand on ceremony as he sat down. He leaned his body slightly forward as he expressionlessly waited for Bilt to begin talking. Seeing no response from the adventurer, Bilt sat down again and sucked at his cigar before leisurely saying, To be honest, there's a motive behind me meeting with every new adventurer. He pointed to the sea map on the desk and the table. He said with a magnetic tone, East from the Rorstad archipelago is where the sea gets progressively messier. The strength of the military and church begin to dwindle, to the point of them only being able to protect their own harbors. The sea around here is a pirate playground, extremely disadvantageous to us adventurers. Therefore, I wish to organize everyone to form a loosely connected alliance, so that we can band together when faced with danger. This alliance doesn't have any strong binding terms. You can choose to turn a blind eye when other adventurers encounter danger, and no one will punish you. However, if you were to encounter a similar situation, don't hope for help to be provided. In addition, I can promise one point, adventurers of the Alliance will be able to get the prices of the lowest nature when purchasing items from me. When selling their spoils, they will at least get market price. After finishing the description, Bilt smiled at the new adventurer. He chuckled and asked, "What do you think of it? Are you interested in joining this loose alliance? Don't worry. You won't need to make any additional payment. Our purpose is only to render assistance when faced with pirates." Klein nodded. "It sounds pretty good." "Haha, I think so too. I once thought of naming this association the Adventuring Brotherhood, but I felt that Brotherhood is overly constrained, so I changed it to Adventurer Association," Bilt said in a self-deprecating manner. Having said that, he lowered his hand with the cigar and smacked his lips. He shook his head and smiled. "Sorry, I forgot to ask your name." Klein maintained his posture and replied in a deep voice, "Gehrman Sparrow." "Gehrman Sparrow." Bilt's eyelids jumped as his smile instantly stiffened. The guards around him clearly tensed up as though they were facing a formidable enemy. Bilt rapidly composed himself and didn't verify whether he was the real Gehrman Sparrow or a cheat who was only passing off as Gehrman Sparrow. He chuckled and said, "Is there anything you wish to buy? I have quite a lot of good stuff over here." "Sonia's golden spring water," Klein said with a calm expression while inwardly feeling cautious. He didn't mention the Drago tree bark since there was a high chance of buying the ingredient at herb stores. Bilt Brando heaved a sigh of relief and smiled. "Easy. 30 pounds for 100 milliliters. Trust me. Even if you head to Sonia Island, it will only be a few pounds cheaper than this price. Those barbarians from Fasak have sealed off the fountain's source, so it's difficult for others to get any of it." Deal. Klein had a rough idea of the price of the golden spring water, and he knew that 30 pounds for 100 milliliters was indeed rather cheap. After completing the deal, Bilt was just about to speak after some deliberation when he suddenly heard knocking. After receiving his permission, a bouncer entered and leaned over, whispering into his ear. Bilt's expression instantly sank as his entire person appeared abnormally cold. He suffused an indescribable killing intent. Indeed, he has quite impressive strength. If he wasn't a famous adventurer in the past, he was a famous pirate. He should be a mid-sequence beyonder. Klein looked at him as he calmly made an assessment. Bilt turned his head and said to Klein with some difficulty, "Mr. Sparrow, I have matters to tend to. We can have drinks together if the opportunity arises." "Okay." Klein slowly got up, without any intention of involving himself in Bilt's matters. Of course, this didn't mean that he wasn't curious, but curiosity was never something that could change the way he did things. After leaving Sweet Lemon, Klein successfully returned to his inn. City of Silver, daytime which was marked by frequent lightning. After Derek Berg finished practicing all the different Beyonder powers of Solar High Priest, he followed the edge of the training field and headed for the Twin Towers. After numerous tarot gatherings, he gradually gained an understanding of the pattern and roughly knew the frequency of the alternating lightning before he would be pulled above the gray fog by Mr. Fool. And now was the final day. Because of this, he had to go to the library to read through historical information involving ancient gods, so as to offer them to Mr. Fool. After passing through the partitioned area of the training field, Derek subconsciously looked inside and saw exploration members resting inside. It was the exploration team led by the 6-member council's chief, Colin Iliad. They had recently finished the exploration based on the information they had received from Jack, and they had returned to the City of Silver where they were now in quarantine. Derek retracted his gaze with a somewhat heavy heart as he went all the way to the steeple and went to the 3rd floor where the library was. He was just about to walk to the bookshelf that held all the ancient books on legends when he caught a familiar figure through the corner of his eye. It was a fair and beautiful woman in her 30s. She wore a long black robe embroidered with mysterious purple patterns. Her curly silvery gray hair cascaded down. She was none other than the elder of the 6-member council who had been imprisoned for a prolonged period of time, Lovia Tiffany. She swept her faint gray eyes over as Derek felt his soul being penetrated. He couldn't help but stiffen for a second. "Greetings, Elder Lovia." He hurriedly lowered his head as he pressed his hand to his chest. Lovia walked over and nodded gently. "I've been removed from quarantine." She turned and left after calmly saying that, as though she was making an announcement. Derek stood on the spot as a layer of cold sweat seeped out from his back. Why has she been released? The 6-member council has already determined that she's all right? Derek thought as his nerves tensed up in an abnormal fashion. Monday afternoon, above the gray fog. Klein placed his elbows on the armrest as he crossed his fingers and watched as beams of crimson light lit up before receding into blurry figures. Then, he heard Miss Justice's brisk greeting. "Good afternoon, Mr. Fool." While Miss Justice was doing the greetings, the hermit Catlia maintained her silence as she observed as she did before. She didn't involve herself in matters, as though she was an outsider at this gathering. She watched as Miss Justice and Miss Magician conjured their Roselle diary pages to pay off their previous debts. Then, she carefully glanced at Mr. Fool without daring to look straight at him. Yet, she still wasn't able to see further through the special gray fog. Her dark purple eyes were only capable of seeing clothes that were definitely conjured. With the 3 pages of Roselle's diary, Klein wasn't in a rush to read it like before. After all, he had already interacted and used a grade 0 sealed artifact and knew what a uniqueness of a Beyonder pathway looked like. He had even intimidated such a divine artifact, so he believed that regardless of Emperor Roselle's content, there was nothing that could shock him greatly. Unless he was given a demoness blessing by some powerhouse with a unique ability and temporarily became a woman. Klein joked inwardly as he surveyed the long bronze table in interest. Ma'am Hermit's curiosity is different from Miss Justice and Company's. She pays great attention to the matter of Roselle's diary? Klein retracted his gaze and took note of this discovery. Then, he casually read the yellowish-brown goatskin. April 22nd. We plan on entering, to explore the abyss. April 23rd. We followed the pitch-black ocean, passed through the liquid-like fog, and arrived at the mountain peak that resembled a monster. Behind it was endless black fog. It seemed to blanket an entire continent. However, looking at the bottom of the peak makes it seem endless and without limit. I had joked with Edwards that if I were to commit suicide by jumping off that cliff, I might never fall to the ground, forever in a state of falling. Upon seeing this, Klein nearly pricked up his brows. He couldn't believe that Roselle would dare to organize his own knights and sailors to explore the periphery of the region after seeing the abyss. Isn't he afraid of dying? Legend has it that it's a place that can corrupt everything, causing all life to perish. At this stage, Roselle definitely hadn't reached sequence 4, and he wasn't a demigod. He was at best a sequence 5, or even lower. If it were me, I definitely would have turned the boat around and reported it to the church. In that instant, Klein gained a deep understanding of the huge difference between him and Roselle. In addition, Roselle's description of the abyss's periphery had reminded Klein of the mysterious stone doors of Amon's mausoleum. A similar scene had appeared after the Church of Steam and Machinery's Archbishop Hormic's puppet made contact with it. I wonder what Roselle discovered there. At the very least, he didn't die from his exploration. He still had an exciting life after that. Klein moved his gaze down and read the remaining content on the diary page. April 24th. We proceeded down the peak in an attempt to probe deeper. The thick black fog is biting cold, as though it can erode flesh and the soul. Haha, luckily, the Dark King I'm on board has certain items that resist this corruption, or I'll suspect that me and my Knights of the Apocalypse will become members off or visiting. Perhaps this is what so-called maturity is? Without children, it's impossible to realize this feeling. No, I don't even have a girlfriend. However, I have to be alert about this state of mind that's mentioned in this entry. It might not exist in the past, but it doesn't mean it wouldn't appear in the future. The higher the sequence, the greater one's godhood is than their humanity. Klein sighed silently as he flipped to the third diary page. January 6th, a brand new year, a brand new beginning. After advancing to artisan, I finally have the powers to do that thing. That is to create the mysterious silver plate in my memories. There is a high chance that my transmigration was a result of it. In fact, after I became a savant, I could already recall its appearance, as well as the strange symbols and patterns on its surface. But the past me could clearly sense that I wasn't able to replicate something like that. January 9th. I finally succeeded after repeated failures. Holding the silver plate filled with special symbols and patterns, I tried hard to inject my spirituality in a bid to activate it. An endless grayish-white fog seemed to surface before my eyes, but nothing happened. Is it a problem with the material, or am I lacking certain requisites? January 10th. According to my recollections of my transmigration experience, I restored my past state, believing that I no longer lacked anything. However, the mysterious silver plate only showed me the strange gray fog. It wasn't able to help me do anything. Since this doesn't work, how did I succeed in my transmigration back then? I temporarily gave up on my attempts, and I destroyed the silver plate I created. Perhaps when I'm a high-sequence beyonder and become a demigod, I will have a way to interpret those patterns and symbols to figure out the truth behind my transmigration. Yes, I'll definitely become a demigod. I'm the protagonist of this era. Grayish-white fog? The Emperor saw an endless grayish-white fog after replicating the mysterious silver plate from Earth. Klein's eyes suddenly shrank when he read the diary entry. There happened to be an immutable endless gray fog beneath his feet. Could it be that our transmigrations have to do with this mysterious space? But why is the Emperor unable to enter, but I can? According to the Emperor's diary entries of the last few stages of his life, he definitely didn't crack the mystery of the silver plate. Otherwise, he wouldn't have not thought of this place when he was in his moment of great despair and mania. He wouldn't have not used this place as his crutch. Klein raised his head as his gaze landed outside the ancient palace. He recalled that deep in this mysterious space, there was a staircase of light that seemed to lead to heaven. It seemed to correspond to his sequence. The staircase appeared to be built for giants, and its destination was the gray fog which seemed to support something that stood in midair. The secret of our transmigration lies there? Klein made the diary pages in his hand vanish before he leaned back into his chair and said with a normal tone, "You may begin." Derek originally wished to bring forward his request to purchase the Sequence 6 potion formula after Solar High Priest, but Elder Lovia's release made him temporarily abandon his plans. He couldn't wait to mention everything that had happened, wishing to obtain the necessary guidance. Considering how this was still the transaction segment, he held back his desire as he waited in silence. There's something on Little Son's mind. Something unexpected happened in the City of Silver? Audrey thoughtfully retracted her gaze and similarly didn't request to purchase anything. At this moment, Alger surveyed the area and voiced out. I need the potion formula of Ocean Songster. Indeed, he's already a Sequence 6, a Windblast. Isn't he someone from the Church of Storms? Why is he looking for the Ocean Songster's potion formula elsewhere? Obtaining it internally from the church is a lot easier. He has secrets he wishes to keep from the Church of Storms, or was he just pretending to be someone from the Church of Storms? Katlia instantly had many theories as she gently took note. I can help you take note. Upon noticing the hermit's response, Alger asked, Ma'am, is there anything you need? I can search for clues ahead of time, so as to trade for the potion formula. Author's note, a meme involving Dark Souls 3. Farron's Undead Legion, also known as the Abyss Watchers, who were corrupted by the Abyss. What do I need? Katlia silently chuckled, having sensed that the hanged man was probing her with a very ordinary question. Any needs meant clues. Ignoring the fact that I've already obtained the potion formula for Sequence 4 Mysticologist of the Mystery Prior Pathway, and accumulating points for one of the main ingredients, even without anything, I have no lack of corresponding resource channels, and far more than one. Katlia had another thought as she recalled the sea god scepter which Mr. Fool wielded. She then smiled and said, I need a mystical item at the demigod level. The kind with acceptable side effects. At that instant, Alger nearly retorted, asking her not to crack a joke. Even in the Church of Storms, one wasn't necessarily capable of obtaining a similar item for years, much less a Beyonder who was obviously only a mid-sequence Beyonder. If I had an item at the demigod level without any real negative side effects, why wouldn't I keep it for my own use? Alger knew that the hermit was using mockery to respond to his attempt at sounding her out, but he wasn't as irascible as his peers. He slowly took a deep breath and said, "I'll keep an eye out. But ma'am, you should know very well that just an effective clue towards such an item might be enough to cover the cost of an ocean songster's potion formula." Barry stayed. Not easily angered. This is very different from the usual style of the Church of Storms. Was the conclusion of my first observation wrong? He's only disguising himself as a priest of the storm? No, I can't think of it that way. This might also be because he doesn't dare to flare up under Mr. Fool's watch. Or perhaps, he's just an odd one out in the Church of Storms. There might not be many, but it's not extremely rare. Catleya wasn't greedy. She didn't sound him out a second time as she nodded. I know. As the conversation between the two came to an end, no one made any requests during the transaction segment. A number of members already had the means to obtain whatever they needed, so there was no need to make any requests for purchases. It was mainly Audrey and Furs who were waiting for the subsequent potion formulas. Another reason stemmed from their financial situation or circumstances, and they weren't able to make any early expenditures. This included Emlyn, who was filled with desire for the Sanguine's Viscount inheritance, as well as Miss Magician who wanted a mystical item. Indeed, as everyone slowly cast off their statuses as low-sequence Beyonders, advancements are no longer that fast. The rate of transactions will also rapidly drop. In the past, there was basically 1 or 2 deals every week, but now, it might be 2 to 3 weeks. In the future, it might even be 3 to 4 months. Without knowing whether it was for the better or worse, Klein nodded gently to indicate that it was time to engage in the free exchange. Audrey looked at Derek and waited for him to describe the unexpected situation at the City of Silver. Derek didn't let her expectations down. Before anyone could speak, he earnestly said, "Elder Lovia has been released. I encountered her at the library." "Shepherd Lovia has been released?" Using flesh and blood, the entire team that she led was corrupted by the true creator, so how can she be without any problems? What is the 6-member council thinking? Klein originally wanted to say something along the lines of, "If there's nothing wrong with Lovia, I'll chop off my head and gift it to the true creator to be kicked like a ball." However, considering how swears and curses involved deities in them and might lead to terrible consequences, he rationally changed his thoughts. "Of course, I don't have to be that careful with me above the gray fog." He sighed inwardly. "Elder Lovia has been released? That shepherd?" Audrey quickly recalled what the name meant. Back then, Little Sun had used Blasphemer Amon's possession and Mr. Fool's help to expose the fact that the entire exploration team had been corrupted by the true creator. As for the team, it was led by Lovia. Her job as a shepherd happened to correspond to the secret suppliant pathway of the true creator. Yes. Derek nodded earnestly as he looked towards the hanged man. Alger thought for a moment before asking, "Has your chief returned to the City of Silver?" Why would Mr. Hanged Man suddenly ask about this? Ah, right. To release such an important figure, it's impossible that the other elders of the 6-member council wouldn't wait for the chief's return. If the chief has yet to return, and that they had decided this without his consent, it goes to show that the situation is even more terrible than one can imagine. It was so terrible that they couldn't even await his return. If the chief has already returned, then the reason for releasing Lovia has a high chance to do with the outcome of the exploration. This is because, according to Little Sun, this is the only exploration in recent times for the City of Silver. Sigh, why didn't I think of this? Audrey, you're still lacking in experience. Audrey reflected and consoled herself in thought. Yes, not long ago. Derek was surprised by Mr. Hanged Man's accurate guesses. At this moment, Furs, who had been listening quietly, combined what she knew from before and suddenly had an idea. Mr. Sun, could this be the situation? Your chief led the exploration team and that little boy, Jack, to seek out a path that leads to the outside world, but they realized that the power of the true creator is required. Haha, this isn't a lie I'm fabricating, but an inference of the facts. The father of that boy, Jack, belonged to the Aurora Order, and they were seeking the holy residence of the true creator before arriving where you are. Therefore, for the entire city of Silver, your chief decided to release Shepherd Lovia after returning. If that's really the case, Mr. Sun would be in grave danger, Audrey said with worry. Furza's words sank Derek's heart. At this moment, Alger shook his head. No, I have the exact opposite belief. Miss Magician's inference is identical to my theory, but I believe this will make it safer for the Sun. Why? Derek's heart calmed down as he asked. Isn't that simple? Balance. Klein scoffed inwardly. The danger of the true creator is noticeable by any sentient creature with eyes and a brain. Your chief will definitely not put all his chips on him. He definitely needs a force that can counterbalance the true creator. As for you, the one who exposed their ploy, you were possessed by Blasphemer Amon, so you might represent another possibility. The more Lovia and company wish harm upon you, the more the chief and the other elders will protect you. This way, they would turn a blind eye to whatever suspicious aspects you didn't manage to erase, Alger explained simply. This ends up being a silver lining? Furs was stunned. Mr. Hanged Man makes a lot of sense. When it comes to analyzing matters and the situation, I'm still far from matching him. Audrey felt somewhat depressed. She even thought of puffing her cheeks, but she immediately realized that it wasn't an elegant act. All she could do was keep those thoughts to herself. For the rest of the members, Emlyn, who didn't know much about Lovia, had a hard time keeping up. However, he knew about Jack and the repeated cycles, so he was barely able to understand the discussion. In order to break out of the City of Silver's conundrum, they released a danger that has the true creator involved? Emlyn inwardly made a guess. Compared to him, Katlia couldn't understand a word. She felt as though she was from a completely different world compared to the other members. I actually have a feeling of admiration despite my incomprehension of what they said. The last time I had this feeling was several years ago. Back then, I was still very weak. There were some inklings in the previous tarot gatherings, especially so when it involves the City of Silver, but never has it been as serious as this time. Also, why are they discussing the true creator and Blasphemer Amon so naturally? It should be the Blasphemer Amon I know of. They're only mid-sequence Beyonders. What have they actually done in the past? Katlia's confidence as a powerhouse suffered a setback at that very moment. After hearing Mr. Hanged Man's analysis, Derek first heaved a sigh of relief before asking with tense nerves, could this result in our City of Silver being destroyed by the fallen creator? He originally wished that Mr. Hanged Man could provide him with an answer that could relieve him, but he ended up hearing the man say in a deep voice, that possibility can't be ruled out. Then what should I do? Derek earnestly sought advice. Under the situation of us not understanding what your chief and the other elders of the 6-member council are up to, I cannot provide you with any suggestions, but I don't think you need to be in such a panic. Alger raised his head to glance at Mr. Fool, who was silently looking at the members from the end of the long bronze table. Tracing his gaze, Derek subconsciously looked over and saw Mr. Fool, whose extremely blurry figure was covered in the gray fog. He instantly felt a sense of serenity, and he couldn't help but recall that holy and powerful angel. Although I've foiled several of the true creator's ploys, I'll definitely not last a second if I were to really clash with him. The situation will devolve into the fool coming to his doorstep, but the true creator finding the fool completely lacking. Klein maintained his casual listening state, without saying a word or showing any expression. Derek retracted his gaze and said to Alger, Mr. Hanged Man, thank you for your help. I will try to figure out what Chief and the others are planning. With the matter coming to an end, Katlia deliberated before saying, was the Blasphemer Amon you were talking about before referring to the ancestor of the Amon family in the 4th Epic's Tudor Empire, the son of the creator? Find authorized novels and web novel faster updates, Better experience, please click www.novelhall.com for visiting. Son of the Creator? Audrey was stunned by what Ma'am Hermit said. She instinctively turned her head to the end of the long bronze table and discovered Mr. Fool sitting there calmly, as though he was tacitly confirming Amon's other identity. The son of the Creator? Alger was stunned by the hermit's description as he couldn't help but twitch his brows. However, he didn't directly inquire further because this could very likely expose certain matters. Besides, he was very confident that there would be other members asking. The son of the Creator? Furs asked with piqued interest. She never expected that Amon had such a shocking identity, aside from the titles like Blasphemer and King of Angels. She was filled with curiosity over this. Catlia swept her a look and said without a change in tone, "Legend has it that back when the original creator split into the various deities and races, his body produced two babies. One of them was Blasphemer Amon. The mural inside Amon's mausoleum was somewhat different from your description. Back when Amon and Adam was born, the creator had just awoken and withdrew the authorities of the ancient gods. He was seated high on a holy mountain and was surrounded by angels as they praised him. There were no signs of him dying or splitting. That mural does have something in common with the City of Silver's historical records. Perhaps the creator had really awoken twice. And perhaps the original creator and Amon's father, the creator as recorded by the City of Silver, aren't the same person. Both of them have an inheritance relationship." As Klein listened to Ma'am Hermit's description, he began theorizing. Amon is actually the son of the creator. Such a status is in no way inferior to the true gods. As for Mr. Fool, our tarot club was able to easily purify his avatar and stop his possession. Audrey recalled the past matters and suddenly felt that she had unknowingly exceeded many ordinary beyonders. The circles and levels of knowledge exposure that the two groups had differed by more than 100 times. She asked with piqued interest, "Ma'am Hermit, do you know the other son of the creator?" "Adam," Catlia answered succinctly. Audrey was clearly taken aback. This was because her question only required a yes or no. After receiving the confirmation that she knew, she would ask for the details and make it clear that she was willing to pay for it. Who knew that Ma'am Hermit had directly given her the name Adam? She doesn't seem to care too much about such information. She's in control of a lot of information. Audrey managed to infer certain matters through this detail as her eyes darted about. "I've never heard of an important figure named Adam." "I haven't either. Apart from being recorded as the son of the creator, it's like he has never appeared before. There are nearly no traces of him in the history of the fourth epoch," Catlia answered frankly. "This Adam is very mysterious. I'm already rather well versed in the fourth epoch's 3 empires of Solomon, Tudor, and Trunsoist, as well as the angel families that come under them. Yet, I've never heard of him before. If it wasn't for Rhodes who live-streamed the Church of Steam and Machinery's exploration of Amon's mausoleum, I wouldn't have even known his name. Has he long perished, or is he hidden in the dark while scheming something?" Klein sighed inwardly. Audrey subconsciously glanced at Mr. Hanged Man and discovered him shaking his head as well. Amon is a king of angels, so it doesn't make sense for Adam to not be one. There should be records in the City of Silver. Audrey looked at Derek. For some reason, Derek easily understood what was on Miss Justice's mind. He said in slight embarrassment, "We do not know about Adam, just like how we don't know about Amon. I was previously searching for ancient tomes related to the King of Angels. I believe that I was lacking in clearance as my sequence was still low at that time. I will continue searching for information on this." King of Angels. Catlia moved her fingers indiscernibly as she memorized the phrase. She knew that Miss Justice would definitely answer if she asked, so without waiting, she directly asked, "Amon is a king of angels that all of you are referring to?" "Yes." To thank Ma'am Hermit for her generosity, Audrey explained in detail, in the records of the City of Silver, the creator had many angels attending to him. Among them, the leaders of the angels who were closest to the throne of God were deemed king of angels. We haven't managed to confirm many king of angels. One of them is the angel of Fate Ouroboros who originates from the ancient tomes of the City of Silver. His title is Tail Devourer. The second is Medici, who Mr. Fool happened to mention. We are still unsure of his title. The third is a guess. We suspect that Amon is the angel of time among the king of angels. Since he is a king of angels, Adam, who is also a son of the Creator, is very likely one as well. Haven't managed to confirm many. I don't even know the term king of angels, but you have already grasped half of them. That's not many? None of your sequences are higher than mine. Katlia nearly became speechless. Only at this point did Emlyn really understand the meaning behind a king of angels. He decided to use these names to seek out traces of the king of angels via the secret historical records the Saywin had in their control after he returned to the real world. Katlia fell silent for 2 seconds before saying, Mr. Sun, you were once possessed by Amon? Yes, it was his avatar, Derek answered honestly. However, he was purified by Mr. Fool. I wasn't injured at all. Purified by Mr. Fool. Katlia couldn't hold back the urge to look at the end of the long bronze table. She originally imagined that she had a general idea of Mr. Fool's state, believing that he was still in a state of reawakening and was unable to use much of his powers. This was why he sought the identity of Sea God and obtained that scepter. However, the present situation shook the foundations of her speculation. She felt that Mr. Fool was like an iceberg. What was hidden beneath the surface was even more terrifying and unfathomable. He easily thwarted Amon's plans. Under certain situations, he can briefly break through the restrictions and produce strength at the level of a god. Katlia's heart sank as she didn't ask further. She cautiously shut her mouth. Find authorized novels and web novel faster updates. Better experience, please click www.novelhall.com for visiting. At this moment, Audrey had thought of something that puzzled her because of this topic. She proactively asked, Ma'am Hermit, after Amon's avatar was purified by Mr. Fool, a worm with 12 transparent rings was left behind. It's said to be a worm of time. Is that correct? Katlia recalled for 2 seconds before saying. Yes. Which pathway does it belong to? I mean, which Beyonder pathway does the Blasphemer pathway belong to? Audrey pressed out of curiosity. Katlia answered directly without any thought, the Marauder pathway. Legend has it that at the saint or angel level, they are able to fool fate and cheat the rules, becoming a parasite of time. Sounds very impressive. Audrey marveled inwardly before asking, then, what can a worm of time be used for? Nice question. Klein secretly cheered for Miss Justice. He pumped himself up as he waited for Ma'am Hermit to give the answer. He happened to have a worm of time in his junk pile. It's a material with rich spirituality and unique effects. It can be used in particular rituals or be used to create high-level charms. But as for how, I'm not sure. After Katlia answered, she suddenly sighed. She recalled the nightmare of being constantly pursued by knowledge, as well as the massive amount of information that could seemingly burst her brains. But even so, she still didn't know a lot. If the hidden sage hadn't gone mad and could provide knowledge bit by bit, I'll actually be more than happy to learn from him. Katlia secretly sighed. All that matters is that it's useful. For how it's used, I have other people to consult. Klein controlled the world with great satisfaction and looked at Emlyn. Mr. Moon, I have something I would like to communicate with you in private. Aren't the transactions over? Emlyn nodded, feeling somewhat uncertain. Okay. The world immediately requested for Mr. Fool's permission and successfully obtained the privilege of isolating everyone. Then, he looked at Emlyn White and said, I wish for you to present to me every action which Leonard Mitchell made in your memories. Why? Emlyn asked in puzzlement. It involves certain secrets. Klein controlled the world to answer succinctly. His true goal wasn't to buy that mystical item, but to observe Leonard Mitchell? That fellow has deep secrets. The world as well. For an investigation, he was willing to spend £7,500. However, that mystical item is indeed powerful. Isn't the world constantly seeking a way to eliminate the mental corruption in a Beyonder characteristic? This is likely useful. Emlyn suppressed his wandering thoughts as he seriously recalled Leonard Mitchell from his point of view. With Mr. Fool's help, he conjured a video in the form of streaming light. When the streaming light landed in the world's hands, Klein quickly browsed through it. He confirmed that Leonard really knew the existence of the grandpa, but he was unable to determine if he understood the danger. Temporarily suppressing any corresponding thoughts, Klein removed the isolation barriers and allowed the Tarot Club members to continue. At this moment, Audrey was reminded of something by Mr. World's private communication. She hurriedly looked at Furs and asked in concern, "Miss Magician, did you discover any abnormalities at William Street?" "That will require Mr. World to answer you," Furs said, having been put into a difficult position. Without waiting for Miss Justice to speak again, Klein controlled the world and hoarsely replied, "There were abnormalities. But I have already informed the Church of Evernight and the Church of Steam. If there are any future problems, I might require your help." "All right." Audrey heaved a sigh of relief. "Informed the Church of Evernight and Steam." This? Catleya found the description ludicrous. From what she knew, a secret organization like the Tarot Club was a natural enemy of the official Beyonders. There was no room for any compromises between the two, but the way the world had dealt with it and the words he used had made it seem like the Tarot Club was an organization that cooperated with the official Beyonders. Colored by these feelings, she listened to the rest of the conversation before bowing and bidding farewell when Mr. Fool made the closing remark. Soon, Klein was the only one left above the gray fog. Second floor of the Sweet Lemon Bar, in the boss's room. Bill Brando held a cigar as he stood by the window. He was looking out, and his eyes were out of focus as he wore a dark and terrifying expression. At this moment, a bodyguard entered, bent his back slightly, and carefully said, "Sir, Sotheth has returned from the east. Let him in." Bill tried hard to correct his expression. Sotheth Yan was his assistant, an important member of the Adventurer Association. In less than a minute, Sotheth, who was dressed in a linen shirt, brown jacket, and red headscarf, walked in. He looked to be in his 30s and had bronze skin. He had recessed eye sockets and a black mustache below and under his lips. He was obviously someone who spent most of his time at sea. Sotheth bowed rather informally and sized up Bill Brando. "Boss, something happened?" "Yes, something happened. From the looks of it, it will fail." Bill didn't keep the matter from him as he sighed. "I have no idea how I'm going to answer that important figure." Without waiting for Sotheth to answer, he asked, "Have there been any changes at the Eastern Front?" "Still the same as usual. The pirates are still after every ship they can plunder. They even target each other. The Navy is only able to guard the various colonial posts, and they're barely able to maintain smooth passage through the sea routes while protecting the relatively important ships. There are often sea battles with both sides obtaining victories at times," Sotheth said as he shrugged his shoulders. "The eastern front of the Sonia Sea is a pirate's playground." Bill sighed in agreement. Sotheth thought for a moment and added, "There has been some recent news from the islands on the eastern front. Apparently it first originated from the Black Death." "Vice Admiral Ailment? What news is it?" Bill asked, his interest piqued. Sotheth said with a solemn and excited tone, "Vice Admiral Ailment really encountered an assassination attempt and was seriously injured. And the person who attacked her was the adventurer, Gehrman Sparrow." "Gehrman Sparrow?" Bill blurted out. "Yes, it's him. He really is a powerhouse at the level of a pirate admiral. Even if it was a sneak attack, it happened on the Black Death. There were so many infamous pirates around, but he managed to successfully escape after dealing a heavy blow to Vice Admiral Ailment. He later hunted Wormtongue Mither," Sotheth answered with affirmation while sighing. Bill staggered before sighing. "That's important news. There are very few powerhouses at the pirate admiral level among adventurers. To be able to deal a heavy blow to a pirate admiral on her flagship while alone, such an operation can only be done if one is absolutely confident in themselves or crazy enough. Only a madman will infiltrate a pirate admiral's flagship in an attempt to assassinate her, instead of finding another spot." Having said that, his expression changed slightly. I met an adventurer named Gehrman Sparrow last night. For real? Sothatha's pupils shrank as he asked solemnly. I can't be sure since I've never met the real Gehrman Sparrow, or seen his photograph or portrait. Bilt shook his head. Sothath thought for a moment and said, you can search for the newspapers from the Rorstad archipelago to confirm his identity. So many days have passed. There should be tourists that would have brought over the corresponding news report and Sonia Morning Post. Yes, the government offices, police stations, churches, and charity organizations will subscribe to the important newspapers of the Rorstad archipelago. The Rorstad archipelago was the biggest colonial grounds of the Lone Kingdom in the central Sonia Sea. Its influence radiated outward, so there was no doubt that Orvi Island, which was within a distance of 3 days of travel, was part of its domain of influence. The official organizations and churches all subscribed to the newspapers and magazines of the area, so any non-crucial news would be received in 3 to 4 days. All right. Bilt nodded as he probed deeper. Do you have the exact details of Gehrman Sparrow's assassination attempt on Vice Admiral Ailment? Sothath thought for a moment and said, it said that Gehrman Sparrow is able to change into anyone, just like Vice Admiral Hurricane Kalangos. It's with that power that he successfully infiltrated the Black Death and found an opportunity to carry out the assassination. He can change into anyone. Bilt's eyes lit up. No, that won't do. That's a crazy guy who dares to infiltrate the Black Death to assassinate Vice Admiral Ailment. He causes one to instinctively fear him and distance themselves from him. The light in Bilt's eyes dimmed. Furthermore, I don't even know if he's the real one or not. He subconsciously shook his head. I wonder when the Nighthawks and Machinery hive mind will take action and deal with the abnormality at William Street. I hope they do it as soon as possible. Amidst his thoughts, Klein left the gray fog and returned to the real world. After some consideration, he took out a piece of paper and laid it out on a brown desk. He wrote with a dark red fountain pen, asking about Mr. Azek's recent situation before mentioning how he had discovered that someone had a parasite in him while he was searching for a mystical item that could steal the beyonder powers of others. Following that, he seemingly asked in passing if there was a way to avoid the parasite and inform the host. With this as a topic starter, he added how he learned from others about information regarding the Worm of Time that was related to high-sequence beyonders from the Marauder pathway. He also mentioned that he knew that such an item could be used as a sacrificial item in important rituals or as a material in high-level charms. However, he had no idea how to produce them. Phew. Klein put down the fountain pen, folded the letter, and brought the copper whistle to his lips. He blew at it forcefully. White bones spewed out like a fountain, forming a gigantic skeleton messenger. But this time, the messenger didn't bore out from downstairs, and it instead tore through the ceiling like many times before, looking down at the summoner from above. Klein knew that this wasn't because the messenger had become impolite again, but because he was staying on the first floor of an inn. He flicked his wrist and threw the letter like a dart, making it land accurately in the messenger's huge bony hand. The flames in the messenger's eye sockets flickered as though it was observing Klein, but ultimately, nothing happened. Its body disintegrated into a waterfall made of bones as they drilled into the ground. After everything was done, Klein didn't spread open the paper crane. He erased what had been written and wrote the same content to seek advice from the Snake of Mercury, Will-Septon. This was because he realized something terrible. The paper crane wasn't a mystical item or beyonder weapon. It was an ordinary piece of paper that had been folded. After repeatedly having its content erased by an eraser, it was beginning to show signs of its structural integrity failing. In a few more tries, it might directly tear. I'll leave extremely important matters that require contact before considering it. For example, only when Mr. Azek isn't sure how to bypass the grandpa to warn Leonard. Klein shook his head silently and rapidly packed up the items on his desk. In addition, he didn't dare to use the radio transceiver to contact Rhodes recently. This was because the powerhouse sent by the true creator was likely still loitering around the area in search for the all-black eyes aura. The scent of the gray fog was also equally able to attract the true creator's attention, allowing him to inform his believers. Today, I'll continue being a tourist and relax. Tomorrow, I'll begin searching for an opportunity to do real acting. Klein retracted his thoughts, draped on his coat, and took his top hat before walking out the inn. He planned on heading to the mountains outside Orvie Harbor to watch the sunset. This thought stemmed from a popular novel. Its author's name was Leon Mastang. This gentleman was born in Odora and had decided to permanently reside in Backland after the age of 20. His books had introduced the sunset at Mt. St. Draco with immense feelings, believing that it was the most beautiful scene he had ever seen. Klein rode a carriage out the city and walked to the foot of Mt. St. Draco. He took an hour before arriving at the peak of the not-so-tall mountain. Time passed as the sun slowly set, making the blue sea situated to the left of the mountain peak appear like a sea of fire. As for the emerald-green forests and the vast fields on the right, they seemed to be gilded. All the colors bloomed with the final touches of radiance in that instant before darkness gradually approached until it became dark. Ships entered the harbor as carriages drove into the city. The busy people began returning home on the roads parallel to the wheat fields and fruit gardens. When darkness enveloped the entire land, specks of warm light lit up one after another inside and outside the city. They were like resplendent gems that dotted the velvet night sky. It's really beautiful. Klein admired for a moment until all the lights from each family were reflected in his eyes. He turned around in silence and walked down the mountain path. Accompanied by the dark trees, he returned to the foot of the mountain before walking for some distance until he hired a carriage along the periphery of the port city. The carriage stably proceeded forward as the dim yellow halos from the iron-black elegant street lamps silently illuminated the ground, receding backwards into the distance. After some time, Klein returned to his inn. He took out his key and opened his door. There was a bed, a desk, and a chair in the room, silently sitting there in the rich darkness. They silently reflected some of the crimson luster. Klein closed the door very gently and walked to the window. He stood in the shadows created by the curtains and remained motionless for quite some time. The lights outside were still bright. Early the next morning, Klein turned on the tap and patted his face with ice-cold water, rejuvenating his entire body. He had already thought of a way to engage in true acting. It was still the hospital where death could occur at any moment. In the past, Klein had only circled the area without much focus. Loitering around had made it hard for him to find any suitable targets. This time, he planned on using some time of volunteer work to stay in the hospital for prolonged periods of time. He could provide hospice to the dying patients who temporarily didn't have their family beside them. By doing so, he could await the targets he needed. After having breakfast, Klein arrived at 10 Black Forest Street and entered the Orvie Hospice Foundation. This was a charity organization of the Church of the Evernight Goddess. One of its responsibilities was to provide the various hospitals with trained volunteers. Klein came to the registration booth and saw the female employee reading the papers. Hence, he lightly tapped the table to attract her attention. "Is there something I can help you with?" The lady lowered the papers and asked. "I wish to do some volunteer work," Klein said succinctly. "Name?" The lady looked up at him. Suddenly, her eyes froze as her right hand trembled. The fountain pen she had just picked up fell to the ground. In the papers in front of her was a portrait that looked almost realistic. "Find authorized novels and web novel faster updates. Better experience, please click www.novelhall.com for visiting." The portrait's owner was that of the crazy and dangerous adventurer, Gehrman Sparrow. Orvie Hospice Foundation. The lady responsible for volunteer registration hurriedly bent her back as she frantically searched for the fountain pen which had dropped. At this moment, Klein also noticed that she was reading a news report paper from a few days ago. It was back when his portrait and escapades were published. This area subscribes to newspapers from the Rorstad archipelago as well? From the time it takes to sail between the places, it's true that they can only read news from 3 to 4 days ago. If I had known earlier, I would have worn a new face and thought of a fake name before coming. Klein stood in front of the desk as he thought helplessly. The lady in her 30s finally picked up the fountain pen, raised her head, and said with a trembling voice, "Why you want to do volunteer work?" Yes, Klein gave an affirmative answer. But you're an adventurer, the mortified lady stammered for an excuse. She instinctively didn't want such an extremely dangerous person to do volunteer work. Being famous isn't necessarily a good thing. Forget it. I'll switch my appearance and name before coming again. Klein had the intention of giving up as he questioned her without any emotion. Who made the rules that adventurers can't do volunteer work? The lady responsible for the registration was on the brink of tears as she blurted out, "It wasn't me." The volunteer registration room became abnormally quiet. Klein was first taken aback before he felt like laughing. It took him a great deal of effort to maintain Gehrman Sparrow's image. After the lady calmed down, she sensed that her answer was clearly problematic. She forced a smile and said, "No, I mean this isn't regulated by anyone. My impression of adventurers is that they are very busy. They need to be out at sea and have very little time to do volunteer work." "That's them," Klein answered succinctly. The lady held her palm to her mouth as she revealed a smile. "All right. I'll immediately help you with your registration." As she spoke, she pulled out a form and handed it over. "Please fill it in. We will provide the corresponding training and volunteer jobs according to your requests. We will contact you, or you can always come over to inquire for any updates." She had already made up her mind not to put Gehrman Sparrow's form into the docket. Instead, she would hand it directly to the Foundation's person in charge and the police. "Goddess, why is this dangerous fellow here to do volunteer work?" She secretly drew a crimson moon on her chest. Klein nodded in silence. He took the form and sat down. Picking up a fountain pen, he began filling in his basic information. During this process, a man in a doctor's gown entered and asked, "Joanna, are there any new volunteers? We'll begin the morning training." Joanna, who was in charge of the registration, had the intention to shake her head. However, Gehrman Sparrow, who sat opposite her, gave her an intense sense of pressure even though he remained silent and didn't raise his head. She didn't dare to lie. "There is," she first replied to the man and then looked at Klein. "Mr. Sparrow, do you wish to receive the basic training for volunteer work now, or do you wish to wait until tomorrow?" Klein thought for a moment before saying, "Now." He planned on familiarizing himself first, allowing him to show his professionalism at volunteer work after changing his identity. That way, he could quickly help out at a hospital. Joanna clearly drew a breath and said, "Then follow Mr. Gravia after you are done filling in the form." "All right," Klein replied calmly. Half an hour later, the calm and polite adventurer who had his madness hidden in him stared at the abnormally dirty toilet in front of him. He held his breath and said, "Scrub it? Find authorized novels and web novel faster updates. Better experience, please click www.novelhall.com for visiting." Right, you have already received the basic training on how to carry a patient. However, that isn't the most common task we do at a hospital. We're mainly in charge of cleaning a patient's vomit or changing and washing the linen, as well as maintaining the cleanliness of the washroom. Matters such as bandaging wounds are left to the professionals. We only need you to have the basics grasped. Gravia pinched his nose as he pointed to the stained toilets. "A volunteer has already demonstrated it to you. Please begin." "This is very different from what I imagined." "Completely different." Klein's first reaction was to turn his back and leave, but he ultimately picked up the cleaning tools with a deadpan expression. He held back his disgust and went over before crouching down. Then, he leaned back a little as he extended his right arm. At noon, Klein took off his white gown and wore his top hat before leaving Orvie Hospice Foundation with a cold expression. He had serious second thoughts about continuing the volunteer work to find opportunities for real acting. Only when his carriage arrived at the Sweet Lemon Bar did he steel his resolve to continue the attempt. "I have to become a nimble right master in 1350 and digest the potion, so as to begin seeking the clues to become a high-sequence beyonder." Klein emphasized his goal once again. He retracted his emotions and entered the Sweet Lemon Bar. He spent 8 pence for apple cider marinated pork ribs and a piece of buttered bread. Together with a cup of rye beer costing 1.5 pence, they formed Klein's lunch. He finished eating in an unhurried fashion before using a handkerchief to wipe his mouth. He said to the bartender, "Where's your boss? I have something to talk to him about." Since he had already verbally agreed to join the Adventurer Association, Klein naturally didn't plan on missing the opportunity to use this loose alliance. He planned to ask Bilt Brando to contact unaffiliated artisans or artisans who were willing to moonlight. He wanted an artisan to create an item like Azek's copper whistle, so he didn't need to set up a ritual and chant the incantations every time he summoned his messenger. It was complicated, troublesome, and a waste of time. Of course, if Bilt Brando didn't know an artisan, Klein didn't plan on forcing the matter. After all, joining the Adventurer Association didn't require him to pay. The bartender pointed to the staircase and said, "He's on the second floor. If you've already agreed to join his association and have seen those bodyguards, then they'll let you up." Klein nodded indiscernibly and slowly got up before walking towards the staircase. Indeed, no guard stopped him. Only when he reached the second floor did a bodyguard approach him to inquire about his purpose. Thanks to his reputation as Gehrman Sparrow, he easily met Bilt Brando again. He also saw an unfamiliar man beside him. "My friend, Sothoth Yan, an important member of the association." Bilt pointed to the man in a red headscarf. At the same time, he exchanged looks with the man and saw the seriousness and puzzlement in each other's eyes. After a simple greeting, Klein got a chair to sit on. He directly said, "I wish to obtain the help of an artisan. I wonder if the association is able to provide any clues." "Artisan?" Bilt sucked at his cigar and paused for a few seconds. He deliberated for a moment before saying, "I do know an artisan, but he's unwilling to meet strangers. This will bring him grave danger. If you have any requests, then I can be the middleman. I believe I have the required reputation to do so." To most churches, mid- and low-sequence beyonders without any evil intentions could be ignored at times. However, artisans needed to be dealt with indiscriminately. Otherwise, the mystical items they created could flood the markets, bringing about extreme unrest to human society. From the looks of it, the Adventurer Association which Bilt organized isn't just wasting money. At the very least, it has amassed quite a lot of resources and information channels. Klein took out the murloc bladder which he had long prepared. "I wish to make this into a ring, mainly to provide one with underwater mobility." He temporarily didn't mention the messenger, planning to test the artisan's ability and Bilt's reputation. If the messenger summoning incantation became widely known, it would create quite a bit of trouble. A sequence 9 Beyonder characteristic isn't expensive. Even if Bilt succumbs to greed and usurps the created mystical item, it doesn't matter. After all, I have a bunch of charms from the sea god domain. Furthermore, it's not like I can't find him to settle the debt. This is better. For him to be able to organize an adventurer association, he definitely has plenty of money and ingredients. As Klein's thoughts reeled, he couldn't help but size up Bilt. In that instant, Bilt shuddered for some baffling reason. All the hair on his back stood up. He felt as though Gehrman Sparrow's eyes looked like he had seen a treasure trove. As treasure, this wasn't a good experience at all. Bilt glanced at Sothoth and forced a smile. "This is a murloc's bladder, right? Making a material at this level into a mystical item basically wouldn't have any accidents. The artisan's fee is 150 pounds. You can pay me after it's crafted." "A very fair price." Klein nodded silently as he threw the murloc bladder over. After Bilt caught it, he added, "Help me ask the artisan if he has the ability to fix the summoning ritual of a spirit world creature onto an item which can be used for at least a year." "No problem." Bilt heaved a sigh of relief before signaling to Sothoth with his eyes. Sothoth rubbed his depressed eye socket and took a step forward. "Mr. Gehrman, would you be interested in heading out to sea soon? We already have a few pretty good ships. They're planning on hiring manpower to the Eastern Front to hunt pirates." "Interesting, but my focus right now is to digest my potion." Klein calmly shook his head. Sothoth's smile froze before vanishing. He didn't say anything further, as it was a rejection from an adventurer at the pirate admiral level. He and Bilt had already found the relevant newspapers and confirmed the authenticity of Gehrman Sparrow. Klein slowly stood up and pressed his top hat to his chest before bowing slightly. "Thank you for your help." Bilt's facial muscles twitched a little as though he was holding back something. He had something to say, but he wasn't able to say it out loud. Finally, he slowly drew in a breath and smiled. "I believe we should hope for a pleasant partnership." Klein sensed Bilt's and Sothath's abnormality, but he suppressed his puzzlement and didn't ask. "I can't ask. There will be trouble once I ask. I have to focus on digesting the potion." Klein turned around and walked to the door before turning the doorknob. "Mr. Gehrman," Bilt suddenly said. The corner of Klein's mouth twitched as he calmly looked back. "Nothing? Haha, I mean, as a member of the association, you can have cheaper drinks over here," Bilt said with a forced smile. "Do you think I would have pressed on the matter?" "TSK." Klein gently nodded and opened the door to leave. After watching his back vanish, Bilt stared in a daze for 2 seconds before letting out a long sigh. Inside the room, Sothath pressed down on the edges of his eyes when he heard Bilt's sigh. He said in a deep voice, "Boss, that important figure will arrive the day after tomorrow." Bilt's expression turned serious as he looked back. "I know. We only have 2 choices. First, we ignore whether Gehrman Sparrow is worth trusting, and we entrust him with the mission. We can only hope for the best outcome. Second, we immediately abandon our business in Orvi, leaving with our cash and jewelry to become pirates at sea. I have the confidence to make most sailors and adventurers on the Pirate Hunter follow us." Sothath paused before adding, "Boss, back when you were an adventurer, leading our ship and hunting pirates, you were always this decisive and tenacious. I believe you have already made your decision. There's no need for me to do anything else." "Haha, there's no need to suck up to me." Bilt smiled bitterly. "I'm no longer the fearless pirate hunter who didn't fear blood or gunfire from before. Long periods of an easy and comfortable life have dulled my will. I don't even wish to seek out chances to advance. Those companions who had turned into monsters still live on in my mind. Phew." He exhaled as his expression instantly turned solemn. "However, you're right. We don't have time to hesitate. We have to immediately make a decision." Having said that, Bilt turned his head and gestured at the window with his chin. Sothath was taken aback for a moment before understanding what his boss meant. After leaving the Sweet Lemon Bar, Klein strolled by the side of the street, planning to hire a carriage at the crossroads. At this moment, he heard a window open above him and saw a figure jump down. Perhaps after experiencing the terrifying incidents involving the Antigonus family's notebook and Bancy Harbor's strange telegraph office, Klein's first reaction was that Bilt Brando was dead. He had suddenly died after his visit and was thrown down from upstairs, falling to the ground with his eyes wide open. This was just like how he saw Ray Bieber's mother dead in a reclining chair back then. The body was highly decomposed, and the eyeball fell to the floor because of the external disturbance. Similar thoughts flashed through his mind as Klein discerned the figure who had fallen from upstairs to be Sothath Yan, not Bilt Brando. Furthermore, he looked normal and was clearly still alive. Oh no, here comes trouble. Klein's heart skipped a beat, having a more accurate guess. If it were himself, he definitely would have pretended not to see Sothath Yan jump off the building to intercept him, running before the man could even say a word and until he shook him off his tail. It would be akin to how Admiral of Stars was being pursued by knowledge. Unfortunately, I'm currently Gehrman Sparrow. A crazy adventurer wouldn't flee because of such trivial matters. Sigh, getting to know myself better is an additional perk. Klein halted and watched as Sothath firmly landed on the ground. He bowed with his hand placed over his chest. "Mr. Gehrman Sparrow, we have a very important task to entrust you." "Here it comes." Klein calmly replied, "I won't be that free lately. This wouldn't waste too much of your time. You can first listen to what it is about before considering to reject or accept it," Sothath said earnestly. "I'm afraid I have no choice but to accept it after hearing it." Actually it's still alright. If Bilt Brando and Sothath Yan threaten me to take the mission, I don't mind changing them into gold pounds and beyonder ingredients. Klein thought it through seriously and discovered that he didn't need to have too many reservations out at sea. Having the strength of a pirate admiral basically made him unstoppable in most areas. He took out the pocket watch in his inner pocket and opened it. I'm giving you 5 minutes. Alright, that's enough. Sothoth pointed at the entrance to the sweet lemon bar behind Klein. Returning to the room, Klein glanced at the wall clock and said coldly, "You still have 3 minutes and 12 seconds. His attitude gave Bilt a baffling sense of ease. He began to believe that Gehrman Sparrow definitely had the capabilities to complete the mission. Mr. Gehrman, I heard that you can transform into anyone, just like how Vice Admiral Hurricane Kalangos was formerly capable of doing so, Bilt hurriedly asked. Who revealed this matter? Klein pricked up his brows as his gaze towards Bilt turned gloomy. If news of Gehrman Sparrow being able to transform into anyone spread, it was quite troublesome for Klein. This was because this made others either think of creeping hunger, making them think of Kalangos' death, or they would think that he was a beyonder who had certain secrets and was suspected to be a faceless. The former would attract the attention of the Twilight Hermit Order, while the latter would attract the attention of the Church of the Evernight Goddess, who would send personnel to investigate. Of course, the Church of the Evernight Goddess wasn't a powerful force at sea, so Klein didn't need to worry too much about it. He just didn't wish to be in conflict with the Nighthawks. If that happened, he had no choice but to abandon his identity as Gehrman Sparrow. This was at the critical point where more and more people knew of the crazy and powerful adventurer who had a soft heart while he was being acknowledged and gaining feedback. Bilt sensed the change in Gehrman Sparrow's gaze as he tensed up. He chuckled and said, "This was news released from the Black Death. Tracy. She's trying to seek revenge on me by doing so. One day, I'll successfully hunt her." Klein nodded slightly and said, "You can think of it as real." He didn't explain how he received his powers of shapeshifting, as this didn't match Gehrman Sparrow's persona. Bilt heaved a sigh of relief and said after 2 seconds of silence, "We're helping an important figure to search for a stand-in." Under Gehrman Sparrow's ambiguous gaze, he explained in detail that important figure needs to independently deal with a secret matter that he doesn't want others to know of, therefore, he needs a stand-in to represent him in dealing with his daily affairs. He would meet different guests and socialize with his mistress without revealing a problem. He will take 3 to 5 days to return. We had already found someone who looked like him, spending a great deal of time to correct his posture and accent, and we had informed the good news to the important figure. Who knew that the tramp would overeat and suddenly die last night? That important figure is about to begin his operation. We do not have the time to look for another person who looks like him, so we can only seek your help. Isn't this the true acting opportunity I've been looking for? Klein was moved. However, he sharply noticed one point. To be addressed as an important figure by Bilt, leader of the Adventurer Association, it definitely meant that the person was an important figure. Matters that happened around an important figure were often not simple. It contained quite a considerable risk. Klein thought for a moment before asking in a deep tone, "Do you think that this matter will be dangerous?" "No, as long as you aren't exposed, there shouldn't be any danger. You need to represent the important figure and appear at social conventions." Haha, no one would dare assassinate him. Yes. I know what you're worried about. You're afraid that this important figure would silence everyone who knows about this matter after it's done? Don't worry, the pirates have fabricated plenty of vicious rumors about him, so even if this matter succeeds, no one will believe it even if you divulge this in the future. It will only be treated as a joke, Bilt said with a smile as he spread his hands. Klein no longer bothered with the topic and switched to asking, "What kind of payment are you offering?" £1,000, and 3 chances to get the artisan to make something for you. Haha, I'll pay for all expenses apart from the materials. Bilt made an offer which he believed Gehrman Sparrow wasn't unable to resist based on what had been previously entrusted to him. It's not bad. Besides, it gives me a chance to do true acting. Klein took a look at the wall clock and said, "I'll return and consider. I'll give you the answer in the evening." Regardless, he had to head above the gray fog to divine the level of danger. Considering how Built and Sothoth were Sequence 7, or even Sequence 6 Beyonders, Klein didn't directly request to head to the washroom in front of them to prevent them from sensing a problem. As the important figure's identity hadn't been revealed, Built wasn't too worried. He nodded. All right. I hope for a pleasant partnership. William Street. A stout man from Faceac who was nearly 2 meters tall was searching for clues. Suddenly, he felt his spiritual perception trigger as he looked up. Light which resembled the morning sun's rays surfaced around his body, illuminating the surrounding houses and street lamps as though they were illusions. At the same time, sparks soared on the street as all kinds of supernatural phenomena appeared. Indeed, the Sauron family has sent people over. The man from Faceac who had his suspicions cast his gaze straight down the street. He saw nighthawks wearing red or black gloves as black gun barrels covered with complicated patterns extended out of the rooftops. They were aimed at him while the surrounding passers-by didn't seem to notice anything amiss. He also saw the Church of Steam and Machinery's Archbishop of the Baklan Diocese, Hormick, and the Church of the Evernight Goddess's Archbishop of the Baklan Diocese, St. Anthony. Immediately following that, he caught sight of members of the Sauron family raising their hands above their heads through the corner of his eye. The powerful Faceac spies also did the same thing. They had decisively chosen to surrender. Resistance only spelled certain death. There was still a chance of being repatriated by surrendering. At 6:30 that evening, Klein once again came to the Sweet Lemon Bar where he met Built and Sweet Lemon Bar. He expressionlessly said, an advance of £500. Then, you will need to tell me who I'm supposed to change into. Built couldn't hold back his smile as he gestured for Sothoth to collect the funds from the safe while saying with a deep voice, he's the kingdom's highest-ranking Navy commander of the Central Sonia Sea. His Excellency Admiral Emerius Revolt. A real demigod.